Elena, you awake?
Barely. Just trying to finish these seating charts. Is everything okay?
I need to tell you what happened after you went to the restroom at dinner tonight.
Oh God. Did Jun's mom say something else about the flowers? I told her to leave it alone.
It wasn't about the flowers. They thought I couldn't understand them, Elena. Your future mother-in-law looked right at me and told June in Korean that I looked like a shabby, pathetic old man who probably smells like cheap beer.
Wait, what? Dad, they don't know you speak Korean. I didn't even know you spoke Korean?
I know. I let them finish their little joke. June even laughed. Then I stood up, raised my glass, and toasted them in perfect Seoul dialect.
Holy shit, you're serious? I missed that?
The look on her face. The wine nearly came out of her nose. But that's not why I'm texting. After you left with Jun to cool off, she cornered me in the hallway.
Dad, please tell me you didn't start a scene at the restaurant.
I didn't have to. She did. She offered me money, Elena.
Money for what?
$50,000 to find a reason not to show up at the altar tomorrow.
And toasted them in perfect Seoul dialect.
Dad, this isn't funny.
I'm not laughing. She told me a girl like you doesn't belong in a family like theirs unless her baggage is cleared out. Meaning me.
I'm going to kill her. I'm calling June right now.
Wait. Don't. There's something you need to know before you call anyone. Why do you think I know Korean, Elena?
I don't know. You said you traveled for work back in the 90s?
I didn't travel for work. I lived in the shadows of the Guro district for 5 years. I wasn't an accountant.
Dad, what are you talking about? You're scaring me.
She recognized me.
Who? Jun's mom?
Her family owns the logistics firm I used to protect back then. She didn't just call me shabby because of my suit. She knows exactly who I was. And she told me if I walk you down that aisle, she'll release the files they have on my time in Seoul.
Files? Like police records?
Worse. Things that would make you look at me differently forever.
I don't care about some 30-year-old drama in Korea. I love you. You're my dad.
Elena, I did things to keep us afloat when your mom got sick that I can't ever take back. Violent things.
Elena.
But I buried that man. But seeing her, tonight, seeing June laugh at her shabby comment, it all came back.
Does June know?
He was there when she threatened me in the hall. He didn't say a word. He just stared at his shoes.
He saw her offer you money to skip my wedding and he stayed quiet?
He's a golden boy, Elena. He does what she says.
I can't breathe. Everything is ready for tomorrow. The dress, the guests.
I'm standing at a crossroads here. I can take the money, disappear, and keep your image of me perfect. Or I can show up tomorrow, blow their entire world apart, and tell you the whole truth. But if I do, the dad you know dies tonight.
Why are you telling me this now? At 1 a.m.?
Because protection isn't about violence anymore. It's about radical trust. I'm letting go of my ego. I'm letting you choose.
One worse. One things that would make you look at me differently forever.
Money.
What?
Take her 50,000. And then meet me at the back entrance of the chapel at 10 a.m.
Elena?
We're using her money to start over. I'm not marrying into a family of monsters. And I'm not losing my father because of a past he survived for me. We leave together. No wedding. No Jun.
You'd really do that?
I'd rather have a shabby father who tells the truth than a husband who watches his mother buy my family's silence.
I don't deserve you.
Just be there. And Dad?
Yeah?
Wear the shabby suit. I want her to see exactly who she couldn't break.
See you at 10. Love you, kid.
Love you too.
Dad, my fiancé insists you join his family for a pre-wedding dinner. That was the text my little girl shot over to my phone barely 24 hours before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. Fast forward to the meal. Her soon-to-be monster-in-law murmurs some snide remark in Korean to her golden boy. They shared a cruel chuckle, completely ignoring my presence, assuming I was just some washed-up, clueless old-timer. I just flashed a grin, pushed my chair back, hoisted my champagne flute, and fired back a response in flawless Seoul dialect. You could hear a pin drop. Welcome to the channel, guys, and thanks for hanging out. Before we dive deeper into this mess, do me a favor. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop your city in the comments below. Just a quick heads up. What you're about to hear is a crafted narrative, spiced up a bit to keep you on the edge of your seat. If anyone sounds familiar, chalk it up to pure coincidence. But the core message? That's a hard-hitting truth meant to make you think twice. You don't survive my line of work without developing a sixth sense for when someone is digging your grave. Except this time, the murder weapon was a slab of 120B ivory paper, elegantly trimmed in shimmering gold. That's me, Eric Sterling. To the outside world, I'm just a 65-year-old ex-fabric merchant rocking white hair and the weary gaze of an expat who's logged too many miles. I was hunkered down in my unassuming Windy City home office, glaring holes into that heavy, off-white parcel. The fancy metallic edging rubbed against my rough hands like coarse grit sandpaper. This wasn't some innocent RSVP card for a joyful celebration. It was an engraved invitation to my own execution. A meticulously orchestrated snare, banking on my attendance to legitimize a marriage that would rob my little girl of my entire life's work. Brian was trying way too hard. All that flashy foil couldn't mask the foul stench of a cornered rat. Running my thumb over the embossed lettering of the venue's location, the metallic tang of my buzzing fluorescent light mixed harshly with the awful sip of my lukewarm dark roast. Shadowed by the gloom, I analyzed the stationery not as a heartbroken dad losing his kid, but with the ice-cold precision of the covert operative I once was. The price tag on this custom printing job was sky-high, way out of the league for some average finance bro crunching numbers at a mid-tier firm. This was a power play, plain and simple. 30 years running black ops, and these amateurs really believed I'd miss the dagger hidden behind their plastic grins. Punks like Brian figure a guy who pushes imported fabrics for a living has lost his instinct for spotting predators lurking in the weeds. They take one look at my graying temples and my sleepy suburban setup, completely confusing a tactical withdrawal with throwing in the towel. The steady swing of the antique clock's pendulum echoed through the room like a ticking time bomb, beating like a heart in a house that had felt hollow ever since Claire moved out. I saw his entire playbook clear as day. By making this invite such a massive, theatrical spectacle, he boxed me in. If I crashed the party, I'd instantly validate every toxic lie he'd fed her about me being the villain. It was an incredibly slick tactic, the exact sort of mental checkmate that crushes average guys. Too bad I'm anything but average. Those fabric shipments I supposedly managed, just convenient cover for moving serious artillery across international lines. Here's the thing. Once the hunter assumes you're nothing but a victim, they get sloppy and leave a trail. Huge error on his part. Shifting the paper beneath the harsh glare of my bulb, I spotted a tiny detail the printer definitely didn't mean for casual viewing. Barely indented into the thick parchment near the lower edge was a microscopic string of Hangul. My lungs froze the second I identified the unmistakable strokes of the Korean alphabet. Guaizo. I muttered the term under my breath, the bitter sound leaving a metallic sting on my tongue. It wasn't just a slur. It was a vicious label used for livestock marching mindlessly into the abattoir. This wasn't a friendly gesture. It was a sadistic taunt, laughing at the lamb on its way to the chopping block. They were dead certain I was strolling blind into their ambush. That freezing logic in my gut instantly gave way to a white-hot, laser-focused rage. Shoving my hand deep into the darkest corner of my desk drawer, I bypassed the dusty tax records and blank envelopes, popping open a secret compartment I hadn't touched in over 10 years. I grabbed the heavy, old-school receiver. The spinning dial clicked in a deadly, nostalgic cadence as I punched in an untraceable sequence, waking up a top-tier covert contact via a frequency nobody thought I'd still have memorized. The dead silence on the line was chilling, yet it didn't cut half as deep as the venom in my kid's words from exactly 3 weeks prior. While waiting for the encrypted connection to establish its handshake, the musty smell of my home office just faded away, swapping out for the sharp sting of citrus cleaner and the blinding reflection of the sun bouncing off Lake Michigan. Suddenly, my mind flashed back to that ultra-modern high-rise on Wacker Drive, planted right in front of the massive wooden desk belonging to 29-year-old Claire Sterling, the fiercely dressed boss. of Sterling Logistics. She was glaring at me with this cocktail of sheer exasperation and sorrow, absent-mindedly twisting that giant diamond on her finger. I had brought her a manila file crammed with red flags, trying to gently sound the alarm on the guy she was ready to vow her life to. Brian Maxwell was a total phantom. I broke it down for her. The guy had absolutely zero real online presence, and his backstory was faker than a $3 bill. Guys cut from that cloth are either watching from the sidelines or waiting to strike. My daughter, though, she wasn't looking for a dad to protect her. She just wanted a rubber stamp on a future she'd actively kept me out of. That was when she dropped the bomb. For the past month, she had been quietly stripping away my access to our corporate security logs, basically leaving me flying blind inside the exact same enterprise I practically bled to build for her. What are you supposed to say when the kid you'd take a bullet for is blindly marching into an inferno of her own making? Scraping her massive leather chair across the polished marble, she shot to her feet, and that awful shriek of friction cut right through the dead silence of her corner office. In her eyes, I wasn't some seasoned phantom who had survived decades of Black Ops combat. I was just a paranoid dinosaur, a cranky, prejudiced boomer throwing a tantrum over her engagement to a Korean-American guy simply because I didn't get to run a background check on him first. She snapped that real life wasn't one of my imaginary foreign deployments and that my delusions had officially alienated the last living relative I had. I didn't flinch. Instead, I kept my tone dead level, the exact same steady, quiet pitch I used to break assets in sweltering, windowless black sites, warning her that I wasn't judging a future son-in-law. I was tracking a hostile target. Copper flooded the back of my throat as my adrenaline spiked, knowing the last tie between us was snapping right then and there. Right before my eyes, the little girl I brought up morphed into a total stranger. Her sheer arrogance was just a paper-thin defense mechanism I knew was destined to crack. Even now, standing alone in my dead-quiet home office years after the fact, I can still feel the physical gut punch of watching her thumb swipe across her screen to permanently block my contact. There was a very good reason I played the part of a boring, retired fabric merchant living in this painfully average suburb. It wasn't merely about keeping my intelligence agency history off the public radar. This entire charade was a deliberate, miserable sacrifice meant to keep the cartel blind to her existence. And she had just casually incinerated that invisible armor by demanding I show up to a wedding rehearsal crawling with predators. Dragging me back into the limelight like that? She had completely cluelessly strapped a massive bullseye onto both of our chests. The burner phone gave a dull buzz in my grip as the secure line caught, instantly erasing the boundary between being a washed-up dad and an active spook. Staring at the screen, that blinking error message vanished, replaced by the dead click of an encrypted channel. Then, a ghost from 2016 breathed out 3 words. Station King, go. Hearing that raspy tone felt exactly like dragging grit across an open gash. It was Vance Prescott, the absolute last living soul who knew my operational handle. Those syllables felt like a heavy iron key snapping open a vault I prayed would stay buried in the dirt permanently. I shot back a 2-word confirmation and killed the connection. Suddenly, the stale air in my den weighed a ton, thick with the undeniable reality of going back to war. Normal retirees grab a stiff drink or their bifocals when disaster hits. Me? I went straight for a warped plank in the spare bedroom closet that I hadn't touched since the Obama years. The oak shrieked as I wrenched it free, exposing a filthy metal lockbox stuffed with the hardware of a phantom identity my kid couldn't even fathom. She honestly believes she earned that corner office at Sterling Logistics through pure hustle, banking on my boring track record moving fabrics. It would destroy her to learn the whole corporation was a total sham, an incredibly elaborate Pacific Rim logistics front for the agency that I personally orchestrated for 25 years. The bedrock of her entire reality is literally forged from classified black-budget operations. Every single penny of that $120 million nest egg came from playing in the darkest corners of the global underworld. Slipping my hands into the case, that familiar punch of stale cedar and solvent hit my nose like a brutal high school reunion. "Long time no see," I muttered, dragging my thumb across the freezing metal casing of a covert audio bug. I wanted to leave you in the ground, but this Maxwell crew forced my hand. My fingers went to work on pure instinct, verifying the silicon gaskets on a hypersensitive lapel mic and firing up a pocket-sized frequency blocker. Back in the game, running your mouth for half a second earned you a permanent dirt nap right in the middle of the demilitarized zone. Over in my daughter's reality, screwing up just gets you a 1-star rating online. The dark comedy of it all was honestly starting to give me a migraine. I intentionally scraped by on pennies compared to what I actually had in the bank, driving a total beater and keeping up a drab suburban lawn just to make sure any old ghosts would overlook me. I honestly thought wrapping us up in a blanket of absolute mediocrity would keep the monsters at bay. Yet, the second I let my kid take the reins and step in front of those cameras, I accidentally triggered the precise nightmare scenario I had burned half my life trying to outrun. She was lighting up the radar like a flare, and Brian Maxwell just happened to be the first shark to smell the blood in the water. Every lethal instinct flooded my nervous system like a nasty virus, burning, violent, and completely unstoppable. I ran my fingers over the sleek polymer of a tracking chip and the worn leather of a forged travel document that still had a solid window before its bogus renewal date. Racking a brand new lithium cell into place with a sharp snap, I dialed in the handheld scanner. My little girl writes me off as some damaged old man clinging to the past, utterly clueless that the very shadows I carry are what kept the monsters away while she played freely in the daylight, completely blind to the teeth flashing just outside her bubble. White noise suddenly cracked through my invisible comms link, a heavy, rhythmic hum, confirming the killing floor was officially open. I had absolutely no intention of playing the passive observer at tonight's rehearsal dinner. Hours ago, while the delivery guy was looking the other way, I slipped a microscopic bug right into the delicate lace of my little girl's bridal gown. Protecting her has always been my job, and you do not abandon your post simply because the lamb invited the slaughterhouse over for drinks. Pushing the encrypted comms device deep into my ear canal, a quiet vibration signaled that Vance was holding down the rendezvous zone with the Maxwell dossier, ready to rip the mask off this whole charade. Chicago's streetlights bled across my wet windshield like fresh crimson as I navigated toward our concrete rendezvous. A torrential downpour hammered the glass, millions of tiny daggers attempting to obscure a reality I knew was going to be hideous. I steered my ride into a massive, desolate parking structure positioned right along the loop. Rusty pipes leaked overhead, slapping the pavement in a steady, haunting rhythm that synchronized with the low rumble of my motor. Sitting parked in the pitch black, I meticulously checked every rearview mirror for followers, inhaling the freezing, humid garage air. An unmarked 4-door slid smoothly into the vacant spot to my left. Special Agent Vance Prescott, a 45-year-old federal ghost sporting serious under-eye baggage, emerged into the dim, damp gloom. He dragged himself out of the driver's seat looking utterly destroyed, like he had not caught a wink of sleep in half a decade, gripping a massive dossier reeking of break-room espresso and classified intel, shooting me a gaze full of exhausted paranoia. He immediately reminded me I was retired from active duty, adding that if his superiors caught him leaking files to Station King, we would both be facing federal prison. I maintained absolute eye contact. I fired back that he was not supplying an operative, but a desperate dad trying to save his kid from a monster in a tailored suit, because Brian Maxwell was far from a typical fiancé. The guy's manufactured fortune was actually just massive debt owed to an underworld cartel that had officially put a hit out on him. Marrying into Claire's $120 million enterprise was not a romantic victory. It was his literal life insurance policy. It never fails. The deadliest predators always sport a blinding smile and a confident grip, a fact I have witnessed repeatedly everywhere from Turkey to South Korea. Sociopaths wearing designer labels consistently inflict the most devastating damage. Snatching the documents from his hands, the freezing, clammy cardboard sent ice straight up my forearm, bathed in the sickly, pulsating orange glow of a dying security lamp buzzing aggressively overhead. I started rifling through the reconnaissance snapshots while choking down the stench of soaked concrete and stale car fumes. Scanning the intel, I realized the future groom was not attending corporate retreats or black tie fundraisers. He was loitering outside an underground gambling den in Macau, looking completely at home, surrounded by heavy hitters I remembered from classified terror watch lists. The Fed laid it out perfectly, confirming that the boy's supposedly elite investment firm was nothing but a massive front. The fake entity had not executed a single legal market transaction in 3 whole years. Turns out, he was the top money launderer for a ruthless crew orchestrating hostile acquisitions of mid-sized freight operations, exactly like the empire my kid inherited. This entire engagement was a strategic play to hijack her maritime access and establish distribution channels to move illegal cargo. And one specific picture proved it. A single image was all I needed. There he was in Seoul, grinning alongside a stunning companion who was absolutely not my little girl. Yet the nightmare went much deeper than infidelity or a few unpaid markers. Leaning into the car, Vance lowered his tone so much it was nearly drowned out by the storm, explaining that the Bureau had been monitoring the kid for 2 years, but were intentionally letting the wedding proceed. The feds required the marriage to take place because they had zero interest in busting a low-level bagman. They were using the ceremony as bait to draw out the shadowy kingpin controlling the massive financial network. That elusive cartel boss happened to be the groom's own mother, a bombshell that flooded my mouth with copper-tasting dread, instantly eclipsed by pure, lethal rage. The agent pointed a finger at a blurry printout showing a sophisticated lady lingering near the slot machines. It was the exact same person I was scheduled to share an appetizer with in exactly 2 hours at the Jade Pavilion, a restaurant practically built to intimidate people. Covered in obnoxious scarlet paint and genuine gold trimming, the place was specifically engineered to make patrons feel utterly insignificant before ordering a drink. Pushing past the grand crimson entrance, I strolled in wearing a $120 million bullseye between my shoulder blades, burying the classified truth deep in my chest. Overpowering waves of exotic wood smoke choked the atmosphere, designed to mentally disorient anyone who stepped inside. Following the hostess through the dining area, the subtle scraping of forks against expensive porcelain sounded remarkably like the drumbeat of a highly civilized battle. Based on the federal intel, this was no ordinary eatery. I had just trespassed onto a private battlefield quietly owned and operated by the mob. I was standing on their home turf, stepping up to a slaughterhouse masquerading as an elite culinary hotspot. Right outside the VIP suite, I bumped into 32-year-old Brian Maxwell, the supposed finance guru, flashing a grin as dazzling and completely worthless as fool's gold. He hovered way too close to my daughter, planting his palm squarely on her lower back. It was a casual claim of ownership that instantly stoked a cold fire in my veins. "Took you long enough," Claire snapped, her tone dripping with a raw shame that stung worse than a left hook to the jaw. "We almost kicked things off while you were MIA. Dipping my chin, I slapped on the face of a tired, sorry old man. "Traffic was an absolute nightmare with the storm, sweetheart," I answered without missing a beat. "Still, wild horses couldn't have kept me away tonight." Glancing around, the gilded trim lining the room felt more like a glitzy prison than high-end decor. Sliding into my chair, my fingertips brushed against the stiff, textured parchment of the drink list. Yet, all my attention was locked dead onto the matriarch holding court at the far end. Elena Maxwell, 58 years old and wrapped up in designer fabrics worth more than a decent family car, held herself like royalty presiding over a doomed empire. She matched those surveillance shots from the Macau gambling halls perfectly cool, collected, and giving off a silent, lethal vibe that the untrained eye would just write off as old money charm. My kid shot me a rigid glare, every tense muscle begging me to keep my mouth shut and not blow this dinner. Staring at my plate, I slipped right back into character, the modest fabric salesman whose biggest thrill was a balanced ledger. I'd spent dozens of years honing this disguise, the total nobody who catches every detail because folks look right through him. Pressing my hands against the glossy, crimson dining surface, I realized it was the perfect icy battlefield for the psychological warfare about to unfold. Staring at my flesh and blood, All I saw was a hostage standing blindfolded on a ledge, totally enamored with the guy holding the gun. Elena practically spoon-fed me a condescending sweetness, layering on the phony charm so thick it made my skin crawl. She went on and on about how cute it was that a guy hawking thread out of a tiny warehouse managed to raise a winner. Every syllable heavily implied my entire existence was just an adorable little joke next to her boy's elite universe. "Put food on the table, ma'am," I murmured, keeping my pitch meek and polite. I never had much use for the fast lane. Right then, a sudden, frantic buzz vibrated against my wristbone. My hidden wire was sending an SOS. The backup crew under Vance's command just got completely cut off from the audio. Somebody flipped the switch on a signal blocker right here in the restaurant. I was flying solo now, completely blind in the middle of downtown. The matriarch shifted her weight toward the center, her ice reflecting the chandelier like a sniper's scope, and murmured a classic Asian welcome. Yet, her cold stare screamed she was just waiting for the ink to dry on my kid's soul. The starters hit the table, fancy little smoke screens designed to blind me before the boyfriend fired up his grill session. The golden boy kicked back in his chair, tossing his expensive red blend around the glass like a victor taking a lap, and started what he assumed was a sneaky probe. It took me 0 seconds to catch the drift. This wasn't getting to know you banter. I was being vetted. The punk was digging into my shipping history, looking to figure out if my supply chains could wash the dirty money from his crew's trafficking racket. He was shopping for a patsy. I leaned into the bit, rambling with the painful sluggishness of a dude whose reality was way too dull to fake. Scooting closer to my plate, letting my cheap sport coat wrinkle awkwardly around the neck, I started yammering about thread counts from the 1990s. I rattled off synthetic fabric import taxes until his brain visibly shut down. I buried the kid under an avalanche of excruciatingly dull facts regarding factory machinery and cargo backups off the coast back in 1994. His shark-like smile melted away, leaving behind the blank stare of a hostage to politeness. Meanwhile, Claire sat there, turning bright red from secondhand embarrassment. "Pop, give it a rest," she finally chimed in, sounding completely mortified. "Nobody here cares about weaving machines. Here is a free pro tip for vanishing in plain sight. You just have to lean into the exact flavor of pathetic they expect from you." Every other suit in this joint was dying to be the alpha dog, sucking up all the oxygen and attention in the room. Me? I would rather be the ugly paint on the walls always present, totally ignored, and entirely forgotten. Giving the golden boy a second to shake off my economics lesson, I zeroed in on the sweat beading outside my beverage. Tracking a lone drop of water racing to the coaster, I smirked internally. It was a perfect metaphor for how I was sliding right beneath their radar. Elena had her crosshairs on me again, tossing out these screechy, plastic chuckles while bragging to my daughter about her clan's tax write-off charities. It was a pure power play, drawing a thick line in the sand to remind me I was just blue-collar trash getting a handout from the elite. Her lip literally curled in disgust as her gaze dropped to the $50 knockoff strapped to my wrist. "You must be so incredibly relieved that your little girl finally snagged someone who can actually provide for her, Mr. Sterling." Her voice dripped with that unmistakable upper-crust condescension, but I simply returned her gaze with a meek, good-natured grin. "All I want is my girl's happiness. Ma'am, I'm a pretty straightforward guy," I said, while her son's eyes drilled into me, desperate to spot a bluff. I handed him honesty, sure, but solely the completely useless bits, while my old agency instincts were going absolutely haywire over how Eleanor actively avoided eye contact with the waitstaff. That is textbook behavior for a predator who views people as disposable appliances rather than living, breathing souls. The faint tang of polished steel hit my nose as I grasped my fork with absolute stillness, turning every single micro-expression into a heavily choreographed routine. I staged a tiny fumble, letting a splash of ice water hit my wrist, perfectly playing the part of a washed-up senior citizen losing his grip, and as I patted the wet fabric with a cloth, I smoothly twisted my sleeve button to aim the concealed wire dead at my host. A microscopic buzz against my forearm let me know the audio feed was locked, loaded, and crystal clear. My role as the clueless future father-in-law was officially over. I was now a walking surveillance hub sitting right smack in the middle of a viper's nest. Eleanor locked gazes with her son, delivering a ghost of a nod while her mouth hardened into a wicked smirk, gearing up to drop secrets she assumed would go right over my head. The switch was flawless. She dumped her broken, courteous English and launched into blistering native Korean, the ultimate camouflage for someone operating right out in the open. While curls of vapor drifted off my freshly poured oolong, the matriarch snapped her hawk-like gaze toward the younger man and started firing off words with chilling machine gun precision. She had absolutely no clue that my decades stationed in Seoul involved way more than textile importing, nor did she realize I had her entire criminal dossier memorized before we even booked the reservation. Down in the darkest corners of the Seoul syndicate, they knew her as a sugar spinner, a bloodthirsty loan shark famous for washing the dirty ledgers of hopelessly doomed gamblers. Right then, flashing me that venomous grin, she labeled me a crumbling hillbilly, relying on a linguistic fortress that didn't actually exist to rip into the bargain bin tailoring of my sport coat. She chuckled over their grand scheme to shove me into an assisted living facility the absolute second the ink dried on the marriage certificate. Her boy just nodded along, his pupils practically glowing with the exact same toxic superiority. He urged his mother to hold steady, reminding her that this old fool was the sole key to unlocking the freight networks required to wipe out their massive casino markers overseas. I took a slow swallow of the scalding dark brew, keeping my expression deadpan and completely blank, all while the tech hidden in my French cuffs buzzed softly, eating up every single drop of their poisonous arrogance. In their minds, I was already a corpse at the table, completely unaware that I was the phantom actively rigging the very mansion they aimed to hijack. Underneath the tablecloth, my knuckles turned white around the cotton square, though I forced my chest to rise and fall at a lazy, measured pace. Leaning forward, I nailed the role of the bewildered, hard-of-hearing elderly dad, pretending to struggle with their foreign chatter. But the matriarch wasn't done yet, pivoting her verbal crosshairs directly onto my daughter. She branded my kid as an idiotic, isolated target who was starving for a scrap of love, claiming she would gladly forfeit a $100 million legacy in exchange for a shiny rock and some sweet talk. Her fiancé chuckled bitterly in his mother tongue, confessing he actually pitied the poor thing, before pointing out that being $12 million in the hole to bookies pretty much murders any sense of compassion. They discussed my flesh and blood like a mere business asset, a pristine container they would drain dry and toss in the trash the moment their cartel buddies took over the shipping channels. Ever shared a meal with monsters plotting to butcher your family's future while politely passing you the dinner rolls? It takes a special kind of stomach to digest that. The suffocating stench of designer fragrance mixed with pure treason was practically gag-inducing, yet I did not break character for a second. I zeroed in on the gentle chime of fine china hitting polished mahogany, such a cozy, normal noise covering up the absolute destruction of my bloodline. The older woman casually snatched a dumpling, her diamond rings flashing like a hawk's eye in the chandelier light, and offhandedly reminded her son that his actual partner, Miss Sophia Vance, was currently chilling in a lavish Chicago penthouse, entirely funded by a Sterling Logistics corporate card he had swiped from us weeks prior. My pulse pounded like a jackhammer against my chest as an icy rage sank deep into my bones. I glanced over at my sweet girl, beaming happily at the man she loved, totally blind to the reality that her sweat equity was currently bankrolling his side piece. The devilish woman shot me a sickeningly sweet grin, though her stare remained as dead as a winter glacier, and switched back to flawless English to ask how my beverage tasted. I bobbed my head, flashing a delightfully empty expression, even though her final foreign phrase was burning a hole in my brain. We execute the old man's authority by morning. That other woman's name struck me like a heavyweight's right hook. A phantom from those leaked overseas casino dossiers was suddenly manifesting right over the appetizers. I stared blankly at the mist curling off my mug, looking exactly like a burial veil for my kid, who was getting fitted for an economic body bag right beneath my nose. Through it all, I stayed perfectly chilled out, lowering my gaze as though I were utterly fascinated by the painted blossoms on my teacup. Switching to his native tongue, my future son-in-law laid out the master plan to his mom, sounding half smug and half like a cold-blooded accountant. My daughter's transport company wasn't just a business to him. It was an immaculate piggy bank waiting to be filled with illicit cash. Thanks to an unblemished financial record and oceans of daily revenue, it served as the ultimate pipeline for washing cartel money via phantom freight. The horrifying truth washed over me. My baby girl was facing something far worse than simple theft. They were framing her to take the colossal hit for a massive federal racketeering scheme. As I kept up my act of the clueless old dad, this punk bragged about cracking into her private mobile device. The guy was firing off fake upbeat texts to her entire social circle to cut her off, making damn sure nobody caught on to her changing mood before the big day. A glorified safe. That is how these monsters viewed my kid, just a container to pack with garbage and incinerate. Eleanor let out a harsh, rasping chuckle that set my teeth on edge, completely ruining the sweet aroma of the high-end floral centerpiece between us. The mother pivoted the chat over to Sophia Vance, mentioning that the mistress was getting restless, waiting up in her Windy City hotel room. The kid was ice cold. He didn't blink once. He calmly told Mommy Dearest that tying the knot was the final hurdle, bragging that he was already swiping my daughter's business plastic to fund his side piece's lavish stay at a premium Gold Coast penthouse. Pure, primal anger boiled up inside my gut, a scorching intensity that almost blew my oblivious disguise to pieces. Decades of my own blood, sweat, and tears, a fortune created solely to protect my child, were financing champagne and caviar for the sleazebags slated to take her place. I stared as the arrogant prick glanced at his flashy wrist candy, a piece of jewelry undoubtedly purchased by destroying someone else's livelihood. It made me sick to think about the trail of shattered families he had left behind before locking his crosshairs onto my flesh and blood. Picture smiling through a 5-course meal while knowing the daily specials are steeped in murder. It takes a hell of a constitution to pull that off. I downed a mouthful of overbrewed green tea, its harsh, astringent bite perfectly matching the icy wrath taking root in my soul. A sudden buzz rattled the polished wood. The smug bastard just swiped away an incoming alert without a second thought. A peaceful split after draining the bank accounts was never the goal. As their fast-paced foreign dialogue continued, the real nightmare took shape. The moment those shared power of attorney documents received her signature and the wealth changed hands, they were going to arrange a fatal mishap for my little girl. Maybe a blown tire on an overpass, neatly wrapped up as tomorrow's front-page tragedy. To them, my only child was just a liability that needed permanent erasing. The bastard actually toasted me with a grin that could cut glass, right as his mother breathed a barely audible death warrant in their native tongue. Her command was clear: get the proxy documents inked before my kid even walked away from the altar. I stared right back, plastering on the goofy grin of a harmless senior citizen. Underneath that doddering facade, my brain ran the lethal math on exactly how fast I could reduce their entire criminal empire to ashes. They flipped back to my language just as the entrees hit the table, offering a picture-perfect illusion smothered in sheer, unadulterated hubris. I took another gulp from my goblet, but the freezing ice did absolutely nothing to cool the inferno coursing through me. I had just witnessed the love of my kid's life casually categorize her upcoming murder as a profitable asset disposal. One of the servers glided over holding some carbonated mineral water, moving with an unmistakable tactical grace. While he topped off my drink, our gazes locked for a split second, sending a wave of icy relief down my spine. This guy was a phantom operative from my former intelligence unit out east, someone I had personally vanished 10 years back. That single look told me I had lethal muscle waiting on standby, right behind the restaurant's swinging doors. Even so, at this exact moment, I was the sole barrier separating my child from an early coffin. The moment they dropped the roasted sea bass in front of my face, the fiery punch of spice hit my sinuses. That intense, biting aroma perfectly mirrored the deadly clarity snapping into place inside my head. Playing my part, I intentionally bobbled my thick wooden utensils, making them bang loudly against the pristine ceramic dish. The mother-in-law cocked her head like a hawk, spotting prey, faking this incredibly condescending look of concern. She questioned if the dish had too much kick and offered to order me something bland. So I just gave her my best, embarrassed, toothy grin. "Goodness, no, the meal is spectacular, Eleanor," I croaked out. I threw just the right amount of pathetic tremor into my vocal cords to lock in the frail old man routine. "It is just these damn old fingers. They do not grip like they used to. Seriously, try keeping up a sweet, geriatric charm while the punk sitting across the tablecloth is mentally shopping for your kid's burial box." The duo went right back to their rapid-fire native chatter, ironing out the dark mechanics of sabotaging the rental car my girl was supposed to drive on her post-wedding getaway. I remained glued to my chair, projecting the ultimate image of a sweet, befuddled boomer. Deep down, though, my brain was reverse engineering the crime scene data for a hit that was never going to happen. Every single lethal whisper, every covert detail, I was mentally compiling the whole damn conspiracy into a clean digital dossier for Agent Vance. Faking a sudden, hacking cough, I covered my mouth with a trembling palm, stealthily tapping the concealed microphone strapped tight against my jawline. A tiny throb from the hidden wire pressed into my chest, a steady, silent heartbeat proving the mic was hot. Every blink of that concealed light meant I was capturing enough proof to burn this whole illusion to the ground. The trap was set. Meeting my daughter's gaze across the table, I plastered on the warm, fatherly grin she had trusted her entire life. "Are you feeling all right, sweetie?" she pressed, her brow furrowing with genuine worry. "You seem completely washed out." Reaching across the table to squeeze her hand, I caught a whiff of the fresh rain clinging to her designer jacket, a chilling hint of the absolute tempest about to wreck her world. "I am just overwhelmed with joy for you, honey," I lied through my teeth. "Watching my little girl step into such a bright, promising tomorrow is a lot for an old man to take in." Beyond the velvet curtains, the roar of downtown traffic faded into a faint murmur, entirely disconnected from the suffocating tension inside this high-end, scarlet-walled private room. Leaning into the plush booth, I chewed a bite of sea bass, tuning out the English pleasantries to focus strictly on Brian's arrogant Korean chatter, where he openly bragged about embezzling cash from his underworld bosses to bankroll a secret getaway. The kid was a bottom feeder playing a very dangerous game, marking himself for a brutal takedown by both his mob handlers and an overprotective father. He was blindly tap-dancing on a trapdoor, completely oblivious to the double-knotted rope slipping snugly around his throat. And yet, the absolute nerve of this guy raising his crystal goblet to wish me a long, happy life. While the waiters whisked away our empty dishes, the groom-to-be casually fiddled with his designer timepiece, and my blood ran ice-cold when it hit me. He was monitoring the exact same operational countdown I was. This punk wasn't even trying to conceal his dagger. He was sharpening it right under my nose, betting his life that the tired boomer in the tweed jacket was entirely too clueless to spot the glint of his family's destruction. Long before the server brought the bill, he shifted forward, closing the distance. Dropping his tone into that rich, hypnotic cadence, he deployed the exact same charm offensive he had used to blindfold my daughter while walking her off a cliff. Whipping out his mobile device, the harsh glow from the display cast brief, sinister shadows across his chiseled, wolf-like face. He angled the screen toward Eleanor, smoothly telling the table he was giving his mother a sneak peek at their luxurious romantic getaway in Asia. The truth was glaringly different. He was flashing a crystal-clear image of the 8th page of a completely fabricated marriage contract. Thanks to decades spent squinting at grainy intel reports in dark underground bunkers, my vision was locked in. I caught every single word using nothing but my peripheral vision, never once turning my head toward the device. Playing the part of a bumbling senior citizen, I hunched forward, acting confused by the bright screen, while mentally photographing the legal letterhead and the distinct forged security stamp from my child's personal attorneys. This slimeball had successfully breached the law group's highly secured network. If she ever requested a verification copy, the system would spit out his altered trap instead of the ironclad agreement we originally drafted. Speaking in hurried, overly confident slang, He bragged to his mom about swapping out the standard protection paragraphs for an absolute control trust provision. It was a slick legal maneuver designed to transform my little girl's inheritance into his private $100 million piggy bank. This went way beyond a simple gold-digging scheme. They were preparing to gut the business empire I had bled to build. A bitter copper tang flooded my mouth as the hidden earpiece buzzed, catching the mother and son chuckling in their native tongue over how pathetically gullible their American targets were. He gloated over how he slipped the corrupted paperwork right under her pen during a rushed bakery consultation. She was so overwhelmed by choosing the perfect frosting and picking out centerpieces that she never bothered to review the fine print. Under his breath, he rattled off the routing digits to the older woman. A specific numerical sequence my mental database instantly flagged as a notoriously dirty financial sanctuary in the Caribbean. This financial time bomb was rigged to detonate the very second the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. The absolute instant they sealed it with a kiss. An astonishing $100 million of my company's cash would vanish seamlessly into a tropical black hole. A rich smell of premium cowhide drifted across the table as he slid the expensive gadget back into his tailored suit pocket. Eleanor's raspy, snake-like murmurs slipped into the conversation, validating his twisted victory. This wasn't merely a massive corporate heist. They were actively digging our graves. As soon as the wire transfers cleared, the tragic, fatal mishap would take place. Leave 0 survivors, the old woman hissed quietly, casting a dead, emotionless glance in my direction, looking at me like a rusted-out appliance waiting for the garbage truck. Have you ever felt the primal, overwhelming urge to lunge over a dinner spread and crush a guy's windpipe? Every ounce of my operational discipline screamed at me to hold my position, while my parental instincts begged me to strike. The low drone of the air conditioning suddenly amplified, filling the heavy void left behind by their sinister chuckling. But I remained firmly planted in my seat, delivering an award-winning performance as the clueless, sentimental dad right down to the final curtain call, even as the terrifying reality of this blood feud fully clicked into place. The kid didn't just owe $12 million to a run-of-the-mill street gang. His massive marker was held by a specific crime boss I had personally locked in a federal penitentiary 10 years prior during a violent raid in South Korea. This was absolutely no random grift. This was a highly calculated, surgical act of war. The pretty boy fiancé was simply the loaded gun, but the hand pulling his strings belonged to a phantom out for my blood, desperate to settle a decades-old score with my family. I stared as he patted his pocket with a cocky grin, completely blind to the fact that the old man he thought he was scamming had mentally secured the exact coordinates needed to utterly destroy him. The bill finally hit the table, which the groom swiftly covered by aggressively slapping down my daughter's business platinum card, marking the initial petty robbery I would permit for the evening. Pushing my chair back with a heavy sigh, I buried my raging fury beneath a pathetic smile, completely prepared to step out into the darkness and unleash hell on these people, trailing closely behind them as we pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the restaurant, letting the freezing, punishing city downpour swallow us whole. That brutal storm wasn't merely rinsing the scent of roasted leaves from the pavement. It was washing away the final hours of peace this family would ever know. Watching my little girl willingly lock herself inside a golden prison completely shattered whatever fragile connection we had left. Right there on the curb, bathed in the sickly glow of a sputtering street lamp, I managed to yank my kid aside for a second. The air reeked of impending thunderstorms and damp concrete, perfectly mirroring the intense hostility radiating from both of us. "Honey, I just need 10 minutes of your time tomorrow morning," I pleaded in a hushed, desperate whisper. Just the two of us, and no attorneys or boyfriends. City lights danced across her stare, yet the familiar affection I used to find there had completely evaporated. Rather than agreeing, she coldly informed me my fail-safe clearance to her corporate network had already been wiped. To her, it was simply drawing a line in the sand. To me, she was ripping away her only parachute. "Knock it off, Dad," she hissed. "You've been glaring at his family all evening like they belong in a police lineup. You're making a total fool of both of us." Right on cue, the golden boy swooped in. The drizzle barely touched his tailored suit as he draped a possessive arm across her shoulders. He shot me a subtle, mocking grin, masked as genuine worry, effortlessly playing the white knight while framing me as the delusional, controlling patriarch. Walking away wasn't enough for her. She was willingly handing her entire future to a guy who viewed her as nothing more than a decimal point on a balance sheet. My eyes locked onto the couple as they strolled toward the idling high-end ride, its door held wide open by an attendant. A crushing sense of loneliness hit me like a physical blow, gripping my lungs far tighter than the bitter city gale ever could. Hovering in the background, his mother observed the entire spectacle with an arrogant grin, silently declaring her victory in this twisted mind game. "Catch you at the ceremony, Al," she purred, her voice oozing with a sickeningly fake sweetness. "Assuming you know how to get there, of course." I kept my mouth shut, letting the freezing downpour hit my face like shattered glass, swallowing the bitter taste of sorrow and storm water. My daughter slid into the leather seats without even bothering to look back. "Get us out of here, babe." Her muffled command echoed right before the heavy door clicked shut. "Step on it." Rubber screeched against the slick blacktop, sending a tidal wave of dirty puddle water splashing straight across my slacks. Those glaring crimson brake lights stared back at me through the pitch-black night like a pair of taunting demons. Left completely by myself on that desolate corner, surrounded by erratic shadows, I knew that my little public meltdown had a hidden purpose. It was a calculated sleight of hand. While the pretty boy was busy defending his damsel and my kid was consumed by mortification, I had covertly brushed against the bumper of that oversized truck, just long enough to slap a high-tech listening device right onto the undercarriage. Those old operative instincts were as sharp as ever. It was a seamless, ghost-like maneuver I'd perfected over decades in far more chaotic environments. Whipping out my mobile device, the harsh screen lit up my drenched features, its subtle hum against my freezing skin grounding me in reality. Locating those frauds wouldn't require any directions. I practically held their pulse right in the palm of my hand. Punching in a 5-word text to my contact, I prepared to shatter their little illusion and launch my counterstrike. Initiate the liability takeover immediately. Staring into the void where their taillights vanished, I flipped the switch from desperate defense to cold, lethal aggression. That 24-hour greasy spoon absolutely reeked of scorched cooking oil and shattered dreams. It was the perfect backdrop for putting a price tag on human life. The pungent odor of industrial cleaner really had no business bringing me comfort. Yet, in my shadowy profession, the most valuable secrets are typically swapped over tepid Java and torn upholstery. Taking a spot in the far back, I kept the exit in clear view, observing the erratic flash of the window display that perfectly matched the chaotic hum rattling around my brain. My associate pushed his digital pad across the beat-up tabletop, the harsh artificial light slicing right through the gloom of our secluded corner. His exhausted gaze met mine, his coat practically radiating the scent of damp asphalt and heavy exhaust. The fiancé's entire existence was meticulously documented inside heavily coded spreadsheets tied to an underground gambling ring operating out of Asia. The bottom line was absolutely sickening. 12,450,000. That massive tab had been snowballing for 18 months straight, spreading like aggressive cancer. It immediately became obvious that his fancy financial firm was completely bogus. It was nothing but an elaborate shell game built exclusively to keep ruthless loan sharks from breaking his family's kneecaps. However, the real gut punch was buried deeper in those files. My guy shifted forward, the awful scrape of his chair echoing loudly, shattering the quiet atmosphere as he exposed how the kid had secretly forged my daughter's corporate credentials to back his underworld borrowing. He didn't simply manipulate her emotionally. He practically hand-delivered her life's work to organized crime. $12 million. To the average guy, that's winning the lottery. To me, it was a loaded gun pointed right at her head. $12 million is way beyond a casual marker, buddy, I muttered, the burnt flavor of the cheap brew feeling like chalk in my mouth. That's a straight-up execution order. Makes perfect sense why the punk is rushing them down the aisle. He's banking on her empire to bail him out of hell. My partner simply nodded slowly, his expression locked in a cold, horrifying understanding. Listen to me, Alaric. This cartel never gave a damn about the cash. They're gunning for the supply chains, and that golden boy fiancé is nothing but a cheap lockpick. They're after the shipping yards, the storage hubs, the exact logistical fortress I spent 30 brutal years erecting just to keep my little girl safe. Swiping past those glowing targets on my monitor, the desperate panic of an ordinary dad instantly hardened into the ice-cold focus of a seasoned Black Ops ghost. Vance shot down my hostile leverage buyout plan the second it left my mouth, calling me completely insane. My angle was simple. Purchase that dirtbag's markers straight from the mob's American shot caller, essentially making myself his absolute financial master. It meant I'd be able to lock down every dime he breathed on, financially crippling the guy before he even put pen to paper on that marriage license. You want to know what separates a corporate suit from an apex killer? The suit is just chasing a quarterly bonus. The killer just wants to watch the light leave your eyes. My handler swore that strolling into an abandoned depot to hand a veteran hitman $15 million was begging for a body bag. He figured I was going in blind and defenseless, but I promised him I carried 30 years of brutal leverage to ensure they'd grab the cash and vanish. The muffled rumble of a midnight cargo train rattled the walls of our secure booth. It was a heavy, shaking reminder that normal life was still racing by outside our dark web of lies. But my focus was locked on the contact I was about to corner. Their stateside boss was a phantom from my own rearview mirror, a mercenary I'd personally dragged out of a botched raid over in Hong Kong back in 2004. We were bound by a life debt, a kind of underground credit that carried way more weight than the mountain of untraceable funds I was currently funneling out of my shell corporations. Snapping my screen shut, I stared blankly at the relentless downpour outside, fully aware that by this time tomorrow, I would either completely own my future son-in-law's existence, or I'd be a corpse missing his only kid's big day. Chicago's forgotten manufacturing zone is a wasteland of corroded iron and dead dreams, the absolute ideal spot for a dead man walking to buy back a life. Breathing in the thick morning haze around those iron gates left a metallic tang in my mouth that tasted exactly like old slaughter. It was a stark flashback to my former career, where twilight summits like this usually concluded with either a massive payout or a shallow grave. I inched my sedan past the massive rusted bay doors, the cavernous space echoing back at me while the pungent stench of wet cement and machine oil coated my throat. The moment my boots hit the dark pavement, my instincts flared, instantly catching the distinct metallic snap of an assault rifle, dropping its safety somewhere up on the metal rafters. Han Wool, the gang's American enforcer, wore a brutal, ragged slash running all the way from his earlobe down to his chin. It was a savage souvenir from the Chinese syndicates I had intercepted back in 2004. He stepped out of the makeshift office, moving with the quiet grace of a wolf spotting fresh meat. We skipped the handshakes, I didn't want one anyway. He got right to the point, casually mentioning his strike team was already gearing up to put a bullet in Brian Maxwell by midnight. The kid had racked up too much heat, and the bosses were completely done carrying his dead weight. Showing up when I did hadn't just thrown a wrench in their timeline. My massive cash offer was the single lifeline keeping my future son-in-law from wearing cement shoes at the bottom of Lake Michigan. Holding his dead-eyed stare without blinking, I kept my tone deadpan, making it crystal clear I wasn't begging for scraps, I was here to clear the board. "You pulled me out of the fire at Kowloon Station, King," he grunted, his dark eyes lingering on the silver creeping into my hairline. "But $15 million is a hell of a heavy burden for a dead man to haul around." A mechanical chime broke the silence the offshore transfer had cleared. $15 million instantly evaporated from a ghost server in Zurich, crowning me the deadliest threat in Brian Maxwell's entire universe in the blink of an eye. I settled into a dented steel chair, the harsh neon glow from my encrypted rig casting terrifying, monstrous shadows across Han Wool's features. "The funds are floating in the digital void," I warned him, keeping my thumb resting dangerously close to the abort shortcut. "Hand over the hard copies," he demanded, sliding a massive manila envelope across the table, its sheer weight feeling like the physical embodiment of Brian's incoming doom. Cracking it open revealed the brutal truth. The initial IOUs, the blood-sucking interest terms, and the totally fabricated corporate surety bonds that Golden Boy actually believed would bail him out. Right then and there, the dynamic completely flipped. I shed the pathetic disguise of a worried, nagging dad begging his little girl to listen. I was now the undisputed master of a $12 million chokehold. I practically owned the oxygen filling Brian's lungs, the designer suits on his back, and every miserable waking minute of his pathetic tomorrow. Han kicked his feet up, a wicked, knowing grin spreading across his scarred face as he congratulated me on my shiny new pet, casually warning me not to paint the walls with him during the reception. Look, normal dads splurge on a toaster or a honeymoon suite. I bought her the actual monster scheming to bleed her dry. Thumbing deeper into the stack of addendums, my heart skipped a beat as I hit a whole new level of absolute scum. This rat hadn't just put my daughter's startup on the chopping block. He had actually leveraged his own mother's hidden offshore pension as backup collateral. He pushed the Maxwell matriarch's entire golden years into the center of the table on a rigged game he was mathematically doomed to bust. It hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about putting a leash on a two-bit hustler. I had just bought the trigger to Eleanor's complete and utter destruction. That arrogant snob who used to turn her nose up at my discount suits and pity my boring little life was now entirely dependent on my goodwill. My knuckles went white as I squeezed that fat stack of paper, the fresh signature ink, still damp against my fingertips, while a brutal, icy wave of absolute victory finally sank deep into my soul. For months, the Maxwell clan had been orchestrating a fatal mishap for my little girl. What they didn't realize was that the sheepdog had already constructed an inescapable trap for their whole miserable pack of wolves. As the dawn mist started to burn off, I headed to my vehicle, bracing myself to deliver one last warning to a bride-to-be who was completely blinded by her own happily ever after. That dead quiet in my home office at 2 a.m? It was a total illusion. Just a flimsy cover for the absolute hurricane I was preparing to hit send on a 2,000-word reality check that Claire was practically guaranteed to brush off. Staring at that freezing digital glow couldn't hold a candle to the genuine bond I used to share with my kid. Still, in the dead of night, it remained the sole lifeline I could throw her. Keyboard clatter rang out through the empty hallways as I remained planted in my chair, painstakingly compiling every last shred of proof into one undeniable electronic dossier. I uploaded the scanned documents proving the Han-Wool financial takeover, threw in those pixelated stakeout shots of Sophia Vance, lounging in her Gold Coast penthouse, and topped it off with the cracked Federal Bureau accounting records. This wasn't some briefing from a top-tier intelligence chief. This was a plea from a shattered dad mourning the loss of a kid who barely even recognized him anymore. I laid out the absolute truth about my years with the agency, offering up the real reason behind the hypervigilance she always despised. I confessed that I had kept my past hidden purely because the ruthless operative I used to be wasn't worthy of raising someone as pure as her. Pleading with her not to just take my word for it, I asked her to simply look at the evidence. After all, reality is going to happen whether she signs off on it or not. Yet, right in the middle of drafting, I stumbled across something even more sinister. That fiancé of hers had secretly rigged her inbox with a custom algorithm designed to catch terms like Federal Bureau, financial ruin, and intelligence agency, guaranteeing my red flags would get instantly trashed. 20 solid years of building impenetrable digital defenses for the government. And here I was, entirely unable to slip a basic, "I love you," past the security protocols of a cheap grifter. It hit me like a ton of bricks just how thoroughly Brian had infected every single aspect of her daily existence. Surrounded by the drone of my computer tower and the bitter scent of day-old espresso, I finally clicked send. Part of me hoped for a sudden sense of peace, or at least the satisfaction of getting it done. What I got instead was a harsh, instantaneous system failure right to the face. Delivery failed. The contact details were either non-existent or completely sealed off from incoming traffic. My eyes burned with exhaustion as the plastic snap of my mouse button echoed into the emptiness of the room. She didn't merely shut me out, I muttered to the shadows. She cemented the whole damn entryway shut. I had to hand it to Brian. His talent for cutting his marks off from the herd was incredible. He had successfully manipulated her into believing that erasing me from her phone and computer was crucial for her emotional well-being before the big day. Have you ever really listened to the quietness at 3 in the morning? It rings out like an execution order. Slumping deep into my desk chair, I stared at the flashing text prompt, pulsing away like a dying man's heart monitor. Still, beneath all that smug confidence, Maxwell had overlooked a critical detail. You absolutely do not pick a battle of wits with the guy who literally authored the textbook on counterintelligence. I let a grim smile slip in the empty room I had planned for this exact digital brick wall before I even typed the first letter. That transmission was never merely an ordinary piece of correspondence. Buried deep in the code was a covert beacon, a stealthy micro-tracker built to slip through commercial defenses and instantly beam me the precise GPS coordinates of whichever server rejected it. No matter how tightly a door is locked, a rejected connection always drops clues if you understand the underlying architecture. Glaring at that bouncing red rejection symbol, the reality set in. Rescuing my girl meant marching straight into her corporate headquarters and giving her a front-row seat to the dangerous phantom she always suspected I was. Now, the Sterling Logistics high-rise was practically a citadel, yet no stronghold on Earth can keep out the architect, who knows exactly where the weak points are hidden. Towering over the Chicago cityscape, the corporate headquarters loomed like an impenetrable crystal castle. It was a monumental tribute to our bloodline's empire, an empire that was quietly getting chopped up and auctioned off. Inside, the ground floor stretched out like a massive, gleaming metal temple. Yet the moment I pushed through the front turnstiles, it felt like the room plummeted 20 degrees, and that chill had absolutely nothing to do with the windy city weather bleeding indoors. An icy blast of artificial ventilation and industrial cleaner smacked me right in the face. I patted my coat for my VIP access badge, a simple magnetic strip that had been my golden ticket into this inner circle for 30 years, and swiped it at the main lift terminal. Instead of the familiar hum of the machinery spinning up, an angry digital beep cut through the lobby. The scanner flashed a harsh, hostile crimson. Before my brain could even compute the lockout, a heavily muscled guard in a spotless dark blue suit, a guy I had literally hired myself 3 years back, moved to block my path, looking incredibly apologetic. Here stood the head of physical safety, a guy who used to treat me like a legend, now gripping his squawking radio tight against his chest, as if it could protect him. He quietly broke the news that my clearance level had just been completely nuked from the system. That was the exact moment I grasped just how toxic Brian's campaign against me had become. The bastard had actually submitted a bogus HR complaint alleging I was planning a violent outburst at the bridal shower, weaponizing corporate security policies to get me legally blacklisted from the property. "My apologies, Mr. Sterling," he muttered, dropping his tone into a painfully awkward whisper. "The chief executive was crystal clear about keeping you out. Blood didn't buy any favors this morning." Staring right into his pupils, I watched his conscience warring with his paycheck. "The man running this company is getting played, kid," I muttered. "And they're cutting you checks just to roll out the red carpet for the guy robbing him blind. For 3 decades, I poured my blood into constructing this empire, only to end up a phantom drifting through corridors that had completely forgotten my name. I personally signed off on every slab of marble in this entryway. Now, I was getting bounced like some random vagrant off the street. A pair of muscle-bound suits closed in, wordlessly ordering me out with their sheer bulk. They ushered me toward the revolving doors with a practiced, velvet-gloved force that felt exactly like dirt hitting a coffin. Shuffling toward the glass exit, I faked a clumsy trip right by the central lift shafts, making sure my billfold tumbled onto the ground. The leather slapped the polished stone with a muffled smack, skidding perfectly out of sight beneath a massive potted fern. Hidden inside that bifold wasn't cash, but a military-grade packet sniffer I'd fired up in the parking garage, a bug that was about to kick off a completely silent, undetectable raid on the corporate network's defenses, all while the rent-a-cops kept their eyes glued to my distraction. The second I breached the exterior doors, the brutal sting of the Windy City's freezing gales violently slapped my cheeks. It was a brutal wake-up call compared to the perfectly heated vacuum inside. Instead of walking away, I planted my boots on the concrete and craned my neck towards story number 42, shielding my eyes from the blinding early daylight. High above, framed by the massive glass panels, the dark outline of Claire stood out. She looked like a stiff, pitch-black strike mark painted on the clouds, her body language radiating pure panic while she gripped her cell. For a single, gut-wrenching heartbeat, her gaze dropped, and I felt our stares lock through over 1,000 feet of bulletproof glare. "Give me 60 seconds, sweetie. Just open the damn folder," I screamed into the freezing gusts, though the downtown traffic swallowed my voice whole. Right then, moving with agonizing purpose, she extended her arm. My mind conjured the mechanical hum of thick drapes dragging over aluminum rails as she triggered the automatic shades. Those blackout curtains didn't merely shut the window, they locked the vault on her life. Staring as my little girl's silhouette was erased by charcoal-colored textile, it hit me hard. The local priest was the single remaining guy in this entire metro area who could derail this wedding without me resorting to a firearm. The parish downtown was the absolute last spot in town where a quiet room didn't feel like a detective breathing down your neck. Yet this morning, I had walked through those wooden doors to recruit a servant of the Lord for a calculated con job. The massive stone chapel carried the heavy scent of melting candles and generations of desperate pleas, serving as a tranquil haven where I was about to pull off a highly justified wrong. Crossing into the shadowy prep room, the icy, sacred draft hit me completely differently than the brutal street weather outside. The elderly reverend, a guy packing vocal cords that sounded like crushed rocks sliding across satin, possessed a stare that had absorbed the dirty laundry of the city's elite for 4 solid decades, waiting quietly in the dimness behind the pulpit. Pivoting my way, his wrinkled face relaxed into the warm greeting of a 10-year bond, though I immediately cut off any chance for small talk. Getting straight to business, I slapped down the paper trail, proving the groom's mob connections right next to the completely fabricated financial documents. I broke the news that the future husband had already swung by the rectory earlier that dawn, trying to slip the front desk clerk cash so she'd smash the upload button on their marital paperwork the exact millisecond they kissed. The bastard had orchestrated a ruthless preemptive strike, aiming to lock down the legal paperwork faster than I could even blink. Laying it all out, I made it clear that letting this ceremony go down would legally shackle my kid to a guy actively hunted by the feds. My pitch wasn't for him to crash the altar, but merely to drag his feet on the back-end data entry, the sole bureaucratic lever he actually controlled. "I'm definitely not demanding you deceive the Almighty, Padre," I murmured softly, letting my palm grip the splintered edge of a vintage mahogany bench. "All I need is for you to starve the government database of one measly autograph for 24 hours. He held my gaze for an eternity, while the flickering glow of cheap crimson glass luminaries threw dancing shadows across his corneas. "You're basically begging me to transform a holy covenant into an undercover honey trap, my friend," he countered, the sheer gravity of his ethical dilemma bleeding through his exhausted tone. Blasphemy? Sure, plenty of folks might label it that. To me, it was just pulling the emergency brake. Your average guy hits the pews seeking spiritual closure, but I was strictly there to buy minutes on the clock. The intense internal war was visible in the sheer slump of his shoulders. Here was the flock's caretaker, desperately balancing Vatican protocol against the survival of an innocent lamb walking straight into a meat grinder, while the overpowering aroma of chilled masonry and burnt resin spiked as he stared at my manila envelope. I swore I'd carry the karmic debt straight to hell myself, provided he cracked that tiny operational window open for me. The feds required a massive enough gap to raid the reception before that state-sanctioned certificate morphed into a solid steel noose choking out my daughter's future. Every single trembling flame on those wicks felt like tiny judgmental eyeballs, witnessing me pawn off a sacred matrimonial promise just to score the upper hand in a war. Eventually, the old man dipped his chin, signaling the verdict was locked in. "Keeping your bloodline safe comes before anything else on this earth," he murmured gently. "I'll be petitioning the Almighty for her survival, and asking him to go easy on your judgment. He signed off on conveniently losing the filing folders for exactly one rotation of the Earth, effectively trapping the newlyweds in an administrative black hole. Sliding a $10,000 check meant for the teen charity across his desk, I quietly settled the invoice for hijacking the poor guy's moral compass. Pivoting on my heel, I marched toward the dense, soundproofed oak exits, my heavy boots cracking like gunshots through the massive, deserted sanctuary. Approaching the exit, my old tactical instinct started screaming. Those perimeter guys my daughter brought on, their dead stares and bull-like builds screamed cartel muscle, not mall cops. That was the exact moment the truth hit me. These guys weren't rent-a-cops. They belonged to the mob. Stepping past the massive wooden threshold, my eyes locked onto a dark, heavily tinted town car parked exactly where it shouldn't be. It was the identical ride that had trailed me since leaving the storage facility. Diplomacy was officially off the table. Out over the water, the evening sky bled out in deep, violent shades of purple, an omen that tomorrow's dawn meant either rescuing my little girl or catching a bullet. I left my place pitch black upon returning. Where I come from, the deadliest strikes happen in total shadow, executed by ghosts. Getting here required a masterclass in evasive driving, tearing through hidden city alleys. I had to pull every trick in the book to shake that dark town car clinging to my rearview mirror ever since the church. Then the pieces clicked. That wasn't the mob on my tail. My future son-in-law had paid mercenaries to keep me on a leash until the vows were exchanged. That kid wasn't merely counting down to the altar. He had me in his crosshairs, making absolutely certain I played the part of the clueless, aging dad he needed me to be. Sliding into my home office, the harsh glow of my monitor burned my exhausted vision while I sliced right through my financial institution's security layers. "You want my empire, kid?" I muttered into the dark. "Good luck hunting down the ashes." I triggered Emergency Protocol Alpha 6, a brutal financial purge designed to erase my entire civilian footprint before sunrise. Enter. $10 million evaporated instantly. Enter. 20 million more gone. Disappearing is a breeze when you possess bottomless pockets and military-grade passwords. Nothing broke the silence except the whirring of my overheated computer, while the scent of hot plastic wafted off my maxed-out secure network hub. Piece by piece, loading screens crept forward, methodically torching the empire I had sacrificed 3 decades to construct. Every stateside bank balance, my manufacturing shares, and my entire nest egg bled out of the country's financial grid. I even signed away the deed to my own home, burying it deep within an impenetrable Black Ops shell corporation. I was butchering my own existence, chopping off infected limbs to keep the core alive through the coming storm. When 3 in the morning finally rolled around, the metamorphosis was absolute. Legally speaking, I possessed 0 assets beyond my current wardrobe and the classified intel locked in my brain. That joint asset contract my future son-in-law bled for? A complete joke. He built a roadmap to a vault I had just stripped bare. "Welcome to the poorhouse, Vance," I told myself, clutching the icy flash drive that held my entire vanished fortune. Just a broke old man with $1 million bounty on his head. A ship's horn echoed sadly off the water, signaling the grim arrival of daylight. My screen flashed a confirmation, slamming the steel doors on my wealth forever. Yet that shell corporation offered far more than a simple offshore piggy bank. I populated its governing committee with former espionage colleagues, killers, and spies who operated in the exact same darkness I did. Routing my daughter's future payout through them meant those operatives now had complete legal authority to investigate any man trying to claim our family wealth. That arrogant kid believed he was securing a massive payday, when he was really inviting a swarm of ruthless intelligence officers to dissect his entire life. Slamming the computer shut, I stared out as the morning rays breached the horizon, fracturing against the waves like broken glass. In exactly 4 hours, I would hand my little girl over to a monster convinced he hit the jackpot, completely unaware he just married an impossible curse. 5 in the morning hits the city with a bleak, shifting haze, the prime operating window for phantoms and assassins. I stayed by the window, letting that early dawn light wash over me, locked on the reality that my future son-in-law was walking into a brutal trap disguised as a massive payout. Gearing up for this event required a very specific routine. A standard necktie acts as either a classy finishing touch or a makeshift strangulation wire, depending on your past clearance level. Today, it simply completed my battle rattle. Staring down my reflection in the master bath, the scrape of a steel blade along my cheekbone was the sole noise echoing through the halls. I dressed with lethal precision, throwing on a premium dark gray two-piece. To the naked eye, I was just a proud dad. But the lining was heavily laced with military-grade Kevlar, a heavy, suffocating shield pressing into my ribs, reminding me that heavily armed thugs would be waiting in the pews. Glancing down at my wrist, I tapped the thick metallic face of a timepiece built for war, not fashion. Holding down a concealed trigger, I linked the dial's frequency straight to the Federal Bureau's tactical countdown. T-minus 7 hours. That sharp hit of cedar from the garment bag was the last familiar thing I'd ever smell. Crossing into the study, morning sunlight hit Elena's silver portrait dead on, flashing a blinding flare that made my eyes water. I stared into my late wife's eyes, locking in on the quiet vow I swore years ago. Keep our little girl far away from the darkness that took her mother. Forgive me for what I'm about to do, sweetheart. I breathed into the empty room. They aren't getting her. The harsh vibration of my burner phone rattling against the mahogany snapped me right back to the brutal task at hand. Right before I lay out the one piece of intel that completely derailed the entire operation, let me ask you, are you paying attention? Drop an A down below if you think I need to go lone wolf on this, or a B. If you think putting my faith in the feds is the right call, and toss in your reasoning so I know where your head is at. Just a quick heads up. Some of these events have been dialed up for effect. This is a hard look at exactly how far a father will go to shield his blood. I snatched the device off the desk, pressing my thumb to the glass to unlock the heavily secured comms channel. Vance Prescott's latest update laid out a ghost invasion. He had exactly 20 ghosts actively slipping into the perimeter around St. Jude's. They were seamlessly blending in, posing as waitstaff pouring champagne, guys handing out programs, and even a few fake billionaires sporting rented designer suits. Vance shot over a confirmation that the backdoor hack was greenlit. The church's audio-visual rig was mine to hijack the second I hit the button. It was understood between us that the moment cuffs went on a single wrist, all the skeletons in my own closet would be dragged out into the daylight. I fired back a quick text, ordering his guys to hold off until the Korean broadcast dropped. I wanted the Maxwell crime family to hear the sound of their empire crumbling in their native language. The last file Vance sent was an X-ray of the couple's baggage. It proved Brian Maxwell had quietly arranged for a heavily armed security detail to tag along on the getaway, a dead giveaway that his crew intended to smuggle my little girl across the border the millisecond the party wrapped. The screen lit up one last time, 20 operatives holding the line. The cage was locked, leaving me with only one final task, walking my daughter down the aisle toward a monster I was about to annihilate. St. Jude's towering steeple stabbed into the gray Chicago skyline like a rusty shank. It stood as a massive symbol of belief. Belief I was preparing to completely shatter with hard proof. Ancient stone demons perched on the roofline, glaring down at the parade of six-figure sports cars rolling up to the curb. I was the only soul on earth who realized this holy sanctuary was acting as ground zero for a hyper-violent federal raid. Pushing the driver's side door open, I hit the pavement, keeping my face completely blank while I strode into the massive foyer. The Kevlar plates strapped under my dark wool blazer felt like a block of ice against my ribs. At dawn, I had personally rigged the church's electronic soundboard, turning the massive organ into a massive frequency blocker. The instant I flipped the switch, that syndicate wouldn't be able to dial out for so much as a pizza, let alone an extraction team. I scanned the room with dead-eyed precision, looking right past the absurdly expensive white roses and locking onto the moving targets. Spotting the undercover backup was child's play for a veteran. You just had to look for the guys handing out programs while standing at military attention. You watch for the clear plastic comms wires running down the necks of guys carrying appetizer trays? Or that wealthy-looking attendee swimming in a jacket cut deliberately wide to conceal a Glock 19? Perfect weather to tie the knot, right? Muttered a guy at the door, feeding me the designated all-clear phrase as I brushed past him. It's a perfect day to collect on debts. I shot back in a deadpan grumble, pushing my way further into the kill zone. Third row back, seat 4. I clocked one of the groom's relatives sitting rigid as a board, sporting a very obvious metallic bulge under his belt. We were officially greenlit. Breathing in the heavy mixture of commercial polish and ancient smoke usually calmed my nerves. But today, it was pure adrenaline. I walked right past the VIP section right up by the altar with my name literally written on it. Taking a front row seat meant giving up my operational edge. I absolutely required a panoramic view of every single escape route in that building. Claiming the very last bench by the main entrance, I dropped down onto the freezing hardwood. From my perch, I monitored the city's highest rollers, pouring through the gates, politicians in the groom's pocket, and socialites green with jealousy over my kid's rising star. None of these rich snobs had a clue their entire universe was seconds away from imploding. I wrapped my fingers around the detonator, hidden deep inside my slacks, gripping the tiny piece of hardware that was going to absolutely torch this criminal empire. It's a wildly surreal headspace, rubbing shoulders with billionaires while clutching the very grenade meant to obliterate their reality. That massive church was nothing more than an ornate empty box. A fake movie set geared up to flip this fairy tale wedding into a 3-act horror show in multiple languages. Harsh sunlight blasted through the giant mosaic windows, staining the marble tiles beneath our feet in deep, violent shades of crimson and blue. The vibe was intensely claustrophobic, less like a house of worship and way more like a tribunal waiting for an executioner. My eyes tracked straight down the center aisle, locking onto the groom. He was huddled up tight, muttering something serious into the ear of a guy who definitely wasn't on the guest list. And the second the guy turned around, I knew exactly who the hell he was. I recognized the guy instantly from the surveillance snaps at the docks, a high-ranking underworld heavy. This impending tragedy they were setting up wasn't some distant possibility. The entire hit was going down right now, playing out in real time under the noses of both the almighty and federal agents. A massive blast from the pipe organ rattled the hardwood beneath my boots, sending deep tremors straight through my skeleton to signal the march had begun. As the colossal sanctuary entryways slowly parted for the bride, I forced my emotions to harden into absolute granite. Bracing myself for the impending chaos, those ancient hinges shrieked, revealing her standing there like an absolute angel draped in ivory satin, marching blindly toward her own execution. She wore that exact same beaming expression I had dedicated my entire existence to keeping safe. The massive mahogany entrance didn't simply swing wide. It breathed out an overwhelming perfume of countless blooming florals, acting as a morbid funeral wreath for my little girl, who was handing her life over to a monster viewing her merely as a living, breathing trust fund. My kid paused right at the entryway, absolutely glowing while bathed in a dazzling kaleidoscope of colorful light pouring through the massive religious windows. Yet her stubborn pride had completely cut her off from everyone. She took that first solitary step down the endless runner without anyone by her side. Keeping her head held high, she broadcasted a silent message of total self-reliance that punched me straight in the gut. When she drifted closer to my spot hiding in the rear pews, I spotted an unfamiliar blue gemstone hanging from her throat, undoubtedly a little present from Eleanor. Years of covert ops conditioning kicked in the second I caught sight of the microscopic camera lens embedded in the silver casing. That was no innocent accessory. It doubled as a high-tech listening bug, guaranteeing the crime family would capture every single syllable she uttered today to use as future blackmail. I shifted toward the aisle right as she glided by, feeling my pulse hammering aggressively against the Kevlar plating strapped under my suit. "I adore you, sweetheart." The words barely escaped my lips, coming out as nothing more than a phantom breath. "Just give me one glance," I begged silently. She strolled right on by, as if I were literally woven into the masonry, just another dusty piece of history she was desperate to incinerate. Her eyes never wavered, staying dead set on the predator standing up by the cross. "Back off and let me breathe, Dad." She dropped the phrase so quietly that it existed entirely in our own private orbit. Even still, that tiny sentence dropped like the gavel of a death sentence. However, my seemingly pathetic mumble served a double purpose. It actually functioned as the audio passcode to activate the stealth drive I had discreetly planted out in the vestibule 20 minutes ago. Buried way down in the cathedral's network, the tech picked up my specific speech patterns and kicked off the ultimate hack into the enemy's primary financial databases. Retreating into the dim lighting of the back corner, I tracked the long tail of her gown as it dragged with a sharp, scraping noise across the freezing stone tiles, sounding exactly like a lit powder keg racing toward a detonation that only I anticipated. The entire congregation was completely enchanted by this fake Cinderella story. But all I witnessed was an active felony, a ruthless corporate raid, dressed up as a sacred religious ceremony. The absolute zero chill of my internal countdown timer pulsed through my brain, with every passing moment dragging us nearer to the absolute edge of the cliff. My girl finally hit the altar steps, greeted by Brian Maxwell's beaming expression that was about as genuine and empty as a cheap counterfeit penny. Staring through the gloom of the back row, I saw him grab her fingers, stroking her knuckles with an arrogant ownership that instantly froze the marrow in my bones. "I made it, Brian," she announced, her tone bouncing loudly off the vaulted ceilings. "The past is dead." The groom tilted his head closer, softly telling her she appeared absolutely stunning. Yet I easily spotted the wolf's snarl lurking right underneath his charming facade. The sunshine filtering through the clerestory glass bathed the couple in a fake angelic radiance, painting an incredibly gorgeous scam. The whole vibe screamed business deal, a simple transfer of property instead of two hearts genuinely tying the knot. I shifted my focus over to Father O'Brien, who was planted there like a quiet security guard overseeing the ritual. The clergyman coughed politely and cracked open his massive leather-bound text, sending the crisp rustle of thick parchment, echoing sharply throughout the massive cavern. He briefly shot a glance in my direction, our gazes locking for a microsecond to silently confirm the massive undercover sting we were mutually executing. He geared up to kick off the priciest sham this diocese had ever seen, while I locked and loaded to tear the whole thing to the ground. Brian gripped my daughter's palms tightly, aggressively rubbing the exact spot where he planned to slide on that diamond, a shiny pair of handcuffs he had invested half a year into crafting. Hearing this criminal swear to protect my kid felt exactly like listening to a venomous viper brag about loving the sunshine. His acting was so incredibly slick that it turned the entire room's spiritual atmosphere into pure slime. He rattled off these rehearsed, flowery promises, heavily loaded with corporate buzzwords about constructing a massive joint dynasty and fusing their separate territories. Keeping my vantage point from the nosebleeds, I locked my radar onto Eleanor Maxwell sitting up in the VIP section. She stared at the bride without an ounce of motherly affection, inspecting her instead with the ravenous gaze of a meatpacker pricing out a slab of premium beef. Right then, the groom casually brushed against his tuxedo jacket, accidentally exposing a covert comms unit tucked into his ear canal. The mob's security detail was actively feeding him real-time intel regarding my exact location lurking in the rear of the sanctuary. Claire brushed away an incredibly authentic happy tear, utterly clueless that her future husband was just reading lines engineered by a cartel shrink to manufacture absolute loyalty. "I swear to shoulder 50% of your every struggle, Claire." His voice boomed through the synthetic distortion of the speaker system. "You are not helping her carry anything. You are just weighing the cargo for shipping," I growled under my breath, letting the massive stone arches swallow up my furious observation. Empire. He tossed that word around 3 distinct times. Monsters always tip their hand with the words they choose. You just have to know what to listen for. My cell phone gave a sudden, double pulse against my leg, a jarring jolt that completely shattered the dreamy, soft focus vibe of the wedding. That was Vance giving the all clear. Every tactical unit on the perimeter was locked, loaded, and ready to breach. I barely blinked. My hand slipped right into my pocket, thumb tracing the custom dials carved into my smartwatch. I tapped out the master phrase cascading and fired it off. Seconds later, that metallic whiff of burning ozone hit my nose. Up in the rafters, concealed projectors whirred awake, entirely hijacked by my network. Down at the altar, Claire started reciting her vows. But just for a heartbeat, her gaze swept the front pews, a little wrinkle of worry crossing her forehead. Her eyes were practically screaming, "Where are you, Dad?" before she forced herself to look back at Brian. She had no idea I had already slipped up to the balcony. I needed a sniper's vantage point to keep her breathing today. Down below, afternoon light caught their pristine wedding bands. To me, that glare looked exactly like a gun flashing in a pitch-black alley. You ever catch a guy grinning while tying his own hanging knot? Brian Maxwell was a total maestro of deception. And his mother? She stared at him with this sickening, dollar sign kind of pride. Her fingers were tightly wrapped around a designer purse. I already knew it was stuffed with counterfeit wire transfer documents. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted another dark town car rolling up to the main sanctuary entrance. The heavy hitters climbing out definitely weren't federal agents. They moved with the unmistakable, thuggish swagger of Macau cartel muscle. Brian's markers had officially bounced, and these goons certainly didn't show up for a slice of wedding cake. They were walking in to repossess my daughter as human collateral. My mouth went completely numb. Getting ready to make my move, the absolute quiet inside that chapel felt suffocating, weighted down by the sheer violence about to unfold. The priest took a massive breath. His baritone voice echoed out of the sound system, hitting the one mandatory question that was either going to act as Claire's death sentence or her ultimate rescue. Should anyone present any valid reason why these two should not be legally married, speak now or forever hold your peace. My thumb pressed the detonator switch in my hand. Instantly, the opening slide of our digitized blackmail dossier projected massively across the cathedral's pale stonework. I wasn't about to let that awkward pause linger. I shot up from my seat. The heavy wooden bench shrieked against the polished stone floors, a noise that cracked like a pistol whipping through a silent room. And for the first time in 20 years, I unleashed my real tone in public. I threw my voice with an icy, downright venomous command that completely shredded the soft, loving mood of the venue. But I didn't address the wedding party in English. I switched to absolute, brutally crisp Korean. I threw the exact same nasty slurs Eleanor had mumbled about me at the rehearsal dinner right back in her face. I branded Brian a literal piece of livestock, and I publicly stripped Eleanor of her fake, wealthy, socialite persona. I called her out as the washed-up, corrupt black market dealer I had personally tracked down and ruined in Seoul 2 decades back. Every single Maxwell went rigid. Their necks snapped up toward the balcony in pure, unified horror. The helpless old fool they thought they were dealing with had vanished. Standing in his place was the phantom who wrecked their original empire. Every ounce of blood vanished from Eleanor's face. Her blinged-out fingers started violently shaking against her fancy dress. She choked out a response in our mutual tongue, frantically asking for my true identity. "You really should have swept the corners for ghosts, Eleanor." I fired back in that exact same sharp, rhythmic Korean. "I caught every single syllable of your little dinner table trash talk. Dead quiet." Then, you could practically hear 300 guests collectively stop breathing. I was done playing the easy mark. I was the executioner now. The sheer, deafening gasp from 400 attendees literally sucked the air right out of the room. I pivoted back to my native tongue, keeping my tone entirely flat and analytical. I started walking the whole crowd through the Maxwell family's actual master plan. I broke down their entire scam, piece by piece. I detailed exactly how they were plotting to use my kid as a human bank account to wash triad money, right before staging a tragic, fatal mishap on their tropical getaway. Claire was practically bolted to the altar steps, shaking so intensely that her floral arrangement started shedding white petals all over the floor like a winter flurry. "Dad, what are you talking about?" she choked out, her voice entirely shattered by the betrayal. You know Korean?" I held her gaze, tasting that nasty, coppery spike of pure adrenaline. Right then, I watched the safe little bubble I had spent her whole life building just absolutely implode from reality. I told her the harsh truth. They weren't looking to welcome a daughter-in-law. They were acquiring a disposable asset for an underground mafia. You ever witness fake royalty devolve into street trash in exactly 6 syllables? It is a genuinely gorgeous thing to watch. Eleanor's perfect, snobby mask didn't just slip it completely vaporized, but the real gut punch went way beyond anything I was saying out loud. I looked dead at the sweating groom and his mom, letting them know that the gorgeous blue jewel hanging around Claire's neck, the exact piece they planted on her as a bug, had been hijacked. I had spliced that secret listening device straight into the venue's surround sound about 5 minutes prior. Every single terrified whisper Brian was currently making his panicked admissions, his desperate begging for his mom to fix this mess was booming loud and clear for the whole room to hear, blasting from the surround system, echoing loud enough for every single high society attendee to absorb. The sharp scent of burning dust and overheated projector lamps saturated the sanctuary just as my digital hijack hit its absolute peak. Brian stared up at the audio rig like he was facing a firing squad, his jaw unhinged in absolute mute terror. Squeezing the hidden clicker inside my jacket pocket, I watched the massive monitors framing the altar flare alive, but they weren't showing those sweet, nostalgic slideshows of my little girl growing up. Instead, they broadcasted crystal-clear wire transfers and falsified paperwork guaranteed to lock Brian Maxwell behind bars until the day he took his final breath. That blinding glow did way more than light up the chapel. It absolutely paralyzed his family with the exact nightmare they had spent their entire lives dodging undeniable, hard-coded facts. Those colorful cathedral windows were meant to depict holy miracles and divine rescue. Yet once my top-tier equipment fully powered on, the only illumination washing over St. Jude's was the unforgiving, sterile shine of a massive financial investigation. My pulse hammered in sync with my finger tapping the controller, completely overriding the venue's scheduled romantic presentation. The groom scrambled toward the event staff, shouting frantically for somebody to pull the plug, but I had already planned for his inevitable freakout. My setup was hooked directly to a standalone power supply I had secretly wired into the building's utility closet several weeks in advance. Rather than cute baby pictures, an enormous, side-by-side breakdown of their legal marriage contract popped up in stark, blinding detail. The left showed the exact document my daughter agreed to. The right displayed his doctored page 8, where a totally fake asset-sharing paragraph flashed in a bright, angry crimson. "Pay very close attention to the monitor, sweetheart," I barked out, my tone slicing right through the escalating wave of horrified gasps. "You are not looking at a romantic commitment. It is literally a receipt selling off your future and the empire I created to protect you." Scarlet. That 8th sheet was oozing scarlet across the display, the absolute shade of pure fraud. The exact hue of a young woman being horribly stabbed in the back by the one guy she truly loved. That distinct scent of frying circuitry wafted down the center aisle while all 400 attendees broke out into a frenzy of confused chatter. I kept my eyes glued to the groom, as his drenched formal wear completely sagged under the sheer pressure of being completely outed. He resembled a trapped rat, frantically scanning the main doors where my private security detail was already standing guard. Hitting the button once more, I swapped the legal papers for a $12.4 million underworld betting tab I had personally bought off the black market. Magnifying the dotted line, the ultra-crisp image clearly showed his signature resting right beside notorious overseas organized crime figures. I declared to the entire crowd that the guy standing up front was far from some genius financial guru. Instead, he was a top-tier government suspect who actually mortgaged his own mother's pension just to pay off a massive failure in the stock market. Eleanor practically collapsed into her front pew, the shiny metallic fabric of her dress perfectly blending with her suddenly pale, lifeless face. Do you have any idea how fast a blue blood status crumbles when you air out a $12 million mafia tab to the entire town? It vanishes quicker than a drop of rain hitting a scorching Texas sidewalk. I saw the flowers tumble right out of my little girl's hands, the white petals smacking the stone tiles as she slowly faced the guy she intended to marry. "Please say this is all some huge misunderstanding," she pleaded softly, her heartbroken tone echoing over the microphone for everyone to absorb. The absolute coward stayed totally silent. He didn't just gamble away your life, sweetie, I called out from the pitch-black darkness near the rear entrance. He wagered his own mom's survival on a completely doomed hand. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted the guys in row 3 dudes the groom assumed were his rich corporate investors pulling out their iPads. In reality, they were a heavily armed squad of specialized financial investigators I brought in to track down every last dime the guy owned so we could freeze it instantly. They were completely gutting the predator's bank accounts before the wedding cake could even be sliced. While the audience stared in absolute shock as the massive deficit kept climbing on the jumbotron, I hit the ultimate trigger on my smartwatch, queuing up a voice recording over the chapel speakers designed to totally shatter my kid's illusion of love forever. The initial noise blasting through the setup wasn't a choir, but the sharp scrape of expensive cutlery hitting fine dining ware. The absolute death knell for the arrogant scumbag who figured he could play my kid like some easy mark. That distinct, echoing acoustic buzz of a private meal bounced perfectly off the high ceilings of St. Jude's, paired perfectly with massive text transcriptions popping up on the monitors. His mother immediately bolted for the side exit the second she heard her own awful words playing over the speakers, only to discover that the massive wooden door was entirely deadbolted shut, thanks to a digital virus I fed into the building's smart locks. Trapped, she had zero choice but to absorb her own illegal scheming right in front of the exact rich snobs she wasted decades sucking up to. The entire audience remained frozen in an absolutely paralyzed, airless quiet, while they listened to the groom and his mom openly chuckling about how horribly gullible my daughter was. Booming and completely unavoidable, his recorded voice called my girl nothing but a pristine bucket for his filthy laundry. He made a desperate final dive for the control deck, his face dripping with terrified perspiration. Too bad his path was instantly blocked by a pair of event staff who were secretly off-duty federal operators on my payroll. "Cut the feed! That is completely fake! It is artificially generated!" the groom shrieked, his polished, high society facade completely crumbling apart right in front of us. 30 seconds of playback. That was the exact amount of time required to transform a joyous matrimonial celebration into a chilling funeral procession. From my vantage point in the rear pews, I observed my little girl as the cloying perfume of floral arrangements surrendered to the undeniable, coppery stench of pure panic. It was as if an invisible fist had punched the wind right out of her, while the broadcast played on with cold, unforgiving precision. Every attendee listened in horror as the groom instructed his mother to grant their accomplice, Sophia Vance, a 72-hour window. He guaranteed that the moment my daughter inked her name on those shared asset documents at the podium, their new empire would stretch far beyond mere waterfront real estate. Peering through my field optics, I tracked the rapid rise and fall of his chest, catching the exact split second his brain registered that his elaborate con had crashed and burned. He locked eyes with his bride, yet any illusion of romance had vanished, replaced entirely by the cold, frantic math of a trapped rat watching his escape hatches slam shut. Their most secretive, hushed conversations from that exclusive restaurant were currently echoing for everyone to hear. The city's upper crust absorbed the scandal like a dark, permanent ink blot. Standing there, I witnessed my kid's soul shatter right before my eyes, a devastating collapse that easily drowned out the massive church pipes. Then came the climax of the playback, the absolute most damning part of the tape. His mother's distinct tone casually outlined the plotted sabotage meant for my kid's vehicle. The audio detailed how the fatal crash would happen right after their post-wedding getaway. Upon hearing her own death sentence, my kid's knees simply gave way. Her floral arrangement slipped from her grasp, spilling pristine petals over the chilled stone like winter flakes. She sank onto the sanctuary stairs in a heap of expensive fabric, trembling uncontrollably as mute, agonizing weeping overtook her. A sabotaged engine? Really? I questioned the groom. My amplified tone shattered the audio track, echoing across the rafters. Had you already picked out which overpass she would drive off? My girl lifted her gaze toward the monster she was seconds away from marrying, Her expression broadcast the horrifying epiphany that her lover was secretly planning to become her murderer. "Make it end, Papa," she wept, offering a fragile, shattered plea that completely shredded whatever emotional armor I had left. I announced to the shocked crowd that international authorities in Seoul had already slapped cuffs on the accomplice they had name-dropped. Furthermore, her complete, documented admission of guilt was primed to play next, all while my kids' cries echoed throughout the paralyzed cathedral. 3 pews back, my lead operative rose to his feet, resting a palm on his concealed carry and staring daggers at me as he waited for the green light. I kept my mouth entirely shut. A single, sharp tilt of my chin was all the go-ahead he needed to unleash our federal hounds on this corrupt family. Barking commands was not necessary. 20 metal firearms, disengaging their locks simultaneously, commanded a far deeper hush over the crowd than any clergyman's sermon ever could. The federal operatives masquerading as helpful attendants and VIP attendees dropped their covers, moving with terrifyingly flawless synchronization. A member of the wedding party, a guy pretending to be an old university buddy, violently wrenched the groom's limb right up to his shoulder blades. I had infiltrated that mole into the groom's tightest crew 6 months prior, specifically for this grand finale. My lead operative stormed the stage, his pistol out and perfectly leveled. The desperate con artist scrambled toward his bride, grabbing at her gown in a pathetic attempt to use her as cover. However, the undercover mole beat him to the punch, driving the groom's skull mercilessly into the icy stone floor. Meanwhile, our perimeter team flowed in like phantoms. They sealed off the exitways, tackling the hired muscle before any of the wealthy onlookers even had time to inhale and shriek. In the blink of an eye, the holy sanctuary became an airtight federal containment zone. The atmosphere grew heavy with the biting odor of firearm lubricant, illuminated by the harsh, blinding glow of security strobes. "You are being taken into custody for interstate telecommunications deception, grand-scale document falsification, and plotting an assassination," the lead agent declared, his words projecting through the live podium speaker to ensure every single guest got the message. "You have no jurisdiction here. Do you have any idea how powerful my financial backers are?" The groom howled, his refined persona totally obliterated by the primitive, hideous panic of a trapped pest. Snap! Heavy steel bracelets would be the only accessories that miserable con man would be sporting for the ensuing 10 years. I observed the scene from the rear, folding my arms tightly against my Kevlar armor. With the traditional matrimonial tunes swapped out for the heavy clatter of combat footwear against stone, my kid remained completely paralyzed. She stared blankly, watching the guy she envisioned building a life with get hauled off like the absolute street-level scum he truly was. The definitive clang of the metal cuffs locking tight reverberated down the main aisle. It served as the ultimate period at the end of a deceitful scheme that nearly murdered my child. A dark, buzzing wave of vindication washed over me when the crowd finally caught on that the gray-haired guy in the back was the one pulling the strings. Care to guess what the absolute best noise on the planet is? It is the dead quiet of an egomaniac the exact second he figures out nobody is buying his garbage anymore. His mother abruptly spun around, her stilettos screeching against the tile as she desperately tried to toss her designer handbag under a nearby bench. She barely made it 5 feet before a pair of female operatives tackled her, snatching away the purse holding the coded cartel records. The woman went completely savage, ripping her own metallic silk dress to shreds as she fought blindly against the officers pinning her down. "Take your filthy hands off me! I'm a Maxwell!" she shrieked, the sound bouncing wildly around the cavernous cathedral. "Not anymore," I muttered under my breath, striding past her down the main aisle while they shoved her face first to the floor. "You're nothing but another hostile target in my dossier now." Over on the other side, Brian was sobbing uncontrollably as they dragged him off, screaming wildly in Korean that everything he did was for Eleanor. In a pathetic attempt to save his own skin, he confessed that his dear old mom had masterminded the entire counterfeiting operation. I kept walking right up to the front, looming over the disgraced groom where he collapsed on the steps. Digging into my jacket, I retrieved one last stack of documents. These didn't bear the Bureau's insignia, but rather the thick, raised crest of Apex Capital. Staring at the scumbag who had almost ruined my little girl's life, I finally allowed my professional facade to drop. A dark grin spread across my face. He stared up at me like a cornered beast, totally clueless that the predator locking him away was after far more than just jail time. I intended to possess every single breath he took from here on out. While the federal team swept the sanctuary in a synchronized blur of motion, I crouched low to deliver a private message. I gently smacked the weighty corporate portfolio right against his sternum. That $12 million marker you racked up with the mob belongs to me today, kid. I purchased the note using the exact trust fund you planned to drain from Claire. Your infinite selfishness just became your own personal prison. Absolute horror washed over his features as the truth sank in. A government prison cell was going to be a vacation compared to what I had planned. The mafia would have just put a bullet in your head. I breathed softly, letting the words hang in the air like a death sentence. But I plan on keeping you breathing, physically fit, and absolutely destitute for the next 40 years. You won't even buy a stick of gum unless I say so. You are a total psychopath, he sputtered, all his high society grace melting into a weak, sniveling sob. You're infinitely worse than the cartel. I couldn't argue with him there. I just stared as they dragged him out the doors, soaking in my victory. At least, that's how the playbook defines it. We hit our targets and eliminated the risks. Yet somehow, I felt like the one wearing the handcuffs. Pivoting around, I looked for my daughter, hoping to share a mutual sigh of relief. Instead, I walked straight into an emotional hurricane that devastated me worse than a bullet to the chest. There she was, standing in the ruins of her special day. Her bridal arrangement was reduced to a smashed pile of stems smelling of burnt air, and she definitely wasn't grateful. She absolutely lost it, yelling that I hadn't rescued her at all. I had merely demonstrated that her entire universe was built on deception. This wasn't about protecting me, she wailed, the painful cry ringing through the massive cathedral. You just wanted to validate your own twisted theories. You burned my world to the ground just to feed your paranoid delusions. I stepped forward. Honey, please. Every single move I made was to keep you safe. I begged, extending my arm toward her. She jerked back like I had the plague, scooping up her shredded dress with shaking fingers. You're a phantom, Dad. A phantom that murders whatever gets too close. Never show your face to me again. And just like that, the massive hall cleared out. It became a vacant tomb filled with smashed petals and shattered vows, reeking heavily of a graveyard rather than a celebration of love. I stood frozen as the ripped fabric of her bridal gown disappeared into the bright glare of the exit. She never once glanced back at the catastrophic mess I had engineered for her so-called benefit. I found myself completely isolated in the sanctuary. The dead quiet inside the building was infinitely louder than the shrieking squad cars disappearing into the busy city streets outside. Slipping a hand inside my coat, I retrieved a tiny, worn-out picture of Helena. Staring at her beaming face, a nauseating wave of realization hit me. I had morphed into the precise monster she gave her life to escape. She died shielding our girl from a phantom who traded family for the job. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut with a boom that felt like a death sentence, trapping me in the creeping darkness. Rooted to the middle of the walkway, the freezing marble tiles chained me to a completely empty triumph. It hit me then by rescuing my kid. I had effectively assassinated her dad. 6 months passed. The brutal Midwestern freeze had arrived, mirroring the dead quiet of my home and the permanent chill in my little girl's stare. My sole companion lately was the harsh, strobe-like glow of the flat screen. It was a pathetic substitute for the roaring fireplace we used to sit by back when she was little, back when she still thought I was just an ordinary guy. Slumped in the pitch-black den, the buzzing fridge was the only noise echoing through a place that was way too massive for a solo occupant. A talking head on the broadcast was breaking down the bitter aftermath of what the press dubbed the holy matrimony takedown. The reporters eagerly ripped apart Brian's destroyed reputation, heavily focusing on the $12 million IOUs and the massive overseas mafia connections we exposed. The segment even brought up how my quiet little fabric company got completely sold off for scraps during the collateral damage, painting me to the outside world as just another mark who fell for Brian's vicious scam. That fabrication served its purpose perfectly, hiding my actual involvement deep beneath the wreckage. Through the pixelated broadcast, I watched authorities escort Elena toward a federal judge. Her chin rested on her chest, a posture of defeat I had assumed was impossible for her. I took a slow drink of my lukewarm Earl Grey. The bleak, metallic taste on my tongue matched my complete lack of triumph. I played the only card I had. I murmured into the empty, darkened room. Yet somehow, the outcome stung like an absolute failure. Can you really call it a salvation? When the one you pulled from the fire refuses to ever look at you again? That exact thought had been eating me alive for 6 agonizing months. The anchor suddenly threw the broadcast to a live shot of Claire, holding court right on the front steps of Sterling Logistics. The nightmare had clearly aged her, carving harsh angles into her face, yet she radiated an unbreakable strength that made my heart ache with overwhelming admiration. She confidently declared that every trace of the Maxwell Syndicate had been surgically removed from the corporation, promising a new era of absolute honesty and independent leadership. Throughout the entire speech, she deliberately omitted any reference to me. While her voice echoed from the television, the faint wail of emergency vehicles seeped through my window, an unrelenting echo of the violent underworld I had leveraged to keep her breathing. She assured the press pool that the enterprise would honor its foundation, though it would strictly operate under solo command from now on. I scrutinized the tiny shifts in her facial muscles, desperately hunting for a glimpse of the child I raised. Our girl is tough, Helena, I silently communicated to the metallic-edged portrait resting above the fireplace. She has your fire and your incredible rage. My fingers grazed the freezing smooth fabric of my cravat. I was still playing dress-up as a guy without a real target, but entirely unable to walk away from the game. Payback is an absolute freezer burn of a meal, and I had been chewing on it for 40 years. It stops the hunger pangs, sure, but it absolutely fails to provide any inner warmth. Right before the broadcast cut away, I caught a tiny flick of Claire's fingers while she squared up her notes. 3 distinct fingers drummed briefly against her thumb, an old childhood code we invented when she was just 5 years of age to signal that the coast was clear. It happened so fast that a casual observer would have missed it entirely. Only someone who had dedicated their existence to protecting her could have caught it. Yet, the signal was undeniable. She was fully aware I was glued to the screen, and this was her covert method of telling her phantom father that the threat was over. My hand was halfway to the remote to kill the power when my mobile device let out the distinct, sharp beep of a heavily secured message. The display lit up, displaying an incoming alert from an entirely untraceable source. The sender omitted any actual words, providing nothing but exact global positioning numbers pointing to a very particular wooden seat I had avoided for 20 years. Pushing myself to my feet, my joints cracking loudly in the quiet room, I immediately recognized the heavy, dread-soaked adrenaline flooding my stomach. Those numbers were far more than a simple geographical marker. They acted as a direct call to action from the single fragment of my past I had desperately attempted to preserve. Without thinking, I grabbed my outerwear. My brain was already calculating sniper angles and exit routes for that specific outdoor square, but a sudden, violent pounding of metal against my front entryway froze my blood, far worse than any professional killer's crosshairs. I certainly did not require satellite navigation to locate that green space. That layout was permanently burned into the exact sector of my mind, reserved for my few remaining joyful thoughts. However, the silhouette standing outside my home was intensely real. Pulling the deadbolt back, I discovered Claire braving the freezing fall downpour, entirely stripped of the immaculate executive aura she had projected on television. She sported a battered university sweatshirt, its soaked material stuck firmly to her shivering frame, while gripping an incredibly beaten-up messenger bag that easily seemed to clock in at 100 pounds. The heavy musk of soaked wool and rain-washed concrete instantly choked the entryway. "You aren't at the rendezvous point," I managed to choke out, my vocal cords practically failing me. "I transmitted that location purely to find out if you were still chasing ghosts." Dad, she answered, her gaze deeply sunken and incredibly intense. I have already arrived. Shoving her way past my shoulder, she marched inside, dragging soaked debris across the expensive floors, and made a beeline for the private library, a space she had been forbidden to enter since childhood. The rhythmic echoing of the antique timepiece in the hallway suddenly sounded exactly like a bomb timer. That outdoor meeting spot was nothing but a trap. A clever piece of bait designed to reveal if the former spymaster was still operating, and my immediate reaction to Bolt had just validated her most horrifying theories. She slammed the massive hide briefcase down onto the solid wood of my workspace, the deafening crash ringing out like a judge closing a murder trial. Her shaking fingers ripped open the metal clasps, exposing an absolute avalanche of paperwork. The charade was officially over. It wasn't merely the syndicate's skeleton in the closet, it was my own. She explained how she had blown the past 6 weeks, paying private investigators to strip away every single blacked-out line from the federal dossier Vance had so helpfully abandoned in her lockbox. Staring into her face, I witnessed the horrifying realization of a captive who had just discovered the invisible cage surrounding her entire existence. She started yanking out, decaying, fragile pages of classified operational debriefs, spreading them across the surface like a detailed blueprint of my worst atrocities. I went through everything, she muttered under her breath. Every single word. The Section 8 dossiers, the intercepted messages from Macau, the bloody exfiltrations out of Seoul. I am fully aware of the Silver Shepherd Directive. I finally understand the real reason my mother is in the ground. I remained completely frozen as 20 years' worth of brutal deception slammed down onto my back. I never intended for this nightmare to be what I left behind for you, kiddo. I breathed out softly. My apologies hung in the air, hollow and entirely inadequate. Her gaze swept the study, the devastating truth finally dawning on her. Those supposedly mundane corporate flights to Japan and Germany had actually been covert battles waged solely to prevent monsters from reaching her doorstep. Staring right through me as if I were some absolute unknown, she was, ironically, witnessing my authentic self for the very first time. Reaching deep into her tote, she extracted a solitary, crimson-spotted dossier, the raw tactical debrief from the exact evening we lost her mother. She pressed it flat against my chest, before plunging her fingers right back into the canvas bag to retrieve another concealed folder. Somehow, she had unearthed the financial records, proving that over the past 10 years, I was the faceless benefactor, bankrolling her corporate empire's worldwide growth via an offshore Caribbean entity. My role extended far beyond playing the invisible bodyguard. I was the clandestine investor who had poured the concrete for her success. Lingering right there in the doorway, my daughter clutched the tangible proof of my entire double existence. She looked completely fragile, held together only by the wet fabric of her soaked sweatshirt. I dropped my gaze back down to the briefing. Though the text had severely lightened over the decades, the heartbreak remained as agonizingly sharp as newly honed steel. It hit me then that the sole remaining deception was the one I harbored within my own mind. My eyes locked onto that rusted, brownish smear tarnishing the manila cover. It was the literal residue of the exact moment my universe collapsed, cementing the fact that retreating into the ghost of my former identity was no longer an option. For 20 solid decades, I had allowed my child to accept the narrative that a senseless traffic collision claimed her mom's life. Collapsing into my heavy wooden chair, I braced myself. A steady, muted pulse from the antique timepiece dominated the space until I eventually shattered the quietness, confessing reality. The crash was absolutely intentional. An organized crime syndicate I had completely dismantled back in South Korea ordered the hit as pure vengeance. My deception had absolutely nothing to do with being embarrassed by my career, I uttered, my vocal cords straining under the massive weight of long overdue mourning. I kept it buried because her final dying wish was a desperate demand to shield you from the underworld. She desperately needed you to experience an existence completely free of constant paranoia. So I dedicated the rest of my days masquerading as a boring fabric merchant, guaranteeing that any leftover enemies would never consider you valuable leverage. I broke down the invisible torture of enduring her deep-seated contempt for my supposed cowardice, all while I was privately maneuvering international spy networks to hold back the actual predators. You literally absorbed my absolute disdain for your mediocrity, she breathed out quietly, a single, devastating drop of salt water tracing down her face. You served as the ultimate barricade against the darkness, and I acted like you were nothing but a total inconvenience. Living that massive falsehood felt like carrying an anvil on my back for 20 straight years. Shedding that disguise felt identical to gasping for genuine oxygen for the first time since 2004. I then decided to disclose a deeply guarded secret I had entirely kept to myself. My operational alias was never actually assigned to me by military intelligence. That specific moniker originated in my late wife's personal diaries, the solitary memento of hers. I refused to incinerate as her intimate method of honoring the solitary protector of our family. She held my gaze, the dancing, amber glow of the fireplace visibly dancing across her pupils. Right then, I witnessed the cold, rigid architecture of her lifelong resentment instantly transform into something resembling actual family warmth. The flames were about to devour much more than mere documents. They were about to erase my phantom self entirely. She snatched a metallic igniter off the tabletop and brought the flame right to the edge of that gruesome tactical summary. The two of us simply remained seated, without uttering a single syllable, letting the pungent aroma of charring pages and roasting cedar waft through the room as decades of classified history disintegrated into gray dust. The suffocating burden of my covert obligations finally evaporated completely. My own flesh and blood instantly transitioned from a vulnerable liability into an equal ally, completely in the loop. Sliding open the bottom compartment of my workstation, I produced an incredibly old, metallic lockpick meant for a secure bank vault. That lockbox didn't house any washed cash or blueprint data that her corrupt associates were after. It exclusively contained my wife's handwritten correspondence and the sentimental keepsakes I had locked away just to spare our child from the agonizing grief. "The nightmare is finally over, Dad," she murmured with incredible gentleness, placing her palm directly over my knuckles. "You can officially retire the phantom routine." I let out a tired smile, responding, "I believe I am ready to give this whole normal parenting thing a genuine shot. Just a regular dad?" I went on to explain that, despite stepping away completely, I had firmly installed an automated cyber countermeasure guaranteed to endlessly defend her corporation, an invisible sentinel operating perfectly without any further deception. Glancing back over at my kid, observing the hearth's glow illuminating a face that genuinely understood me at last, I experienced a historic milestone. Zero urge to nervously monitor the entryway for assassins. The rich, savory aroma of roasting herbs wafting through my cooking area felt absolutely universes away from the harsh, copper stench of weapon lubricants. It represented a profoundly peaceful triumph in a lifelong conflict that had successfully relocated from blackside alleyways to our dining space. 3 entire months had vanished since that catastrophic showdown at the church, and the oppressive emptiness of my property was actively being replaced by the vibrant noise of actual human connection. Hovering near the burners, I relished the simple, grounding heaviness of the stoneware dish as I served up our roasted poultry. This had become our mandatory weekend tradition, a delicate connection we were painstakingly reconstructing with every single bite. After throwing away a lifetime surveilling her movements via heavily coded security channels, simply observing her kick back at my island counter to casually serve herself some Pinot Noir turned out to be the absolute only tactical briefing I ever actually cared about. I caught sight of the frosty moisture beating up on her crystal goblet just as she tossed a warm, easy glance my way. The icy walls that had blocked my daughter from me for decades were finally thawing out, yet the real plot twist of our story remained my own buried secret. That mysterious phone call pointing foreign federal agents straight to the target's bunker a few weeks back? It was absolutely no accident. I had painstakingly forged that electronic trail while triggering a fatal kill switch, crafting an ultimate safety net to keep our enemies buried for good. "Our latest financial quarters are hitting record highs, Dad," Claire spoke with a genuine swagger I had never heard before. Now that those phantom shareholders were no longer bleeding us dry, the business was absolutely booming. Sliding her dinner onto the table, I settled into my chair as a gentle gust from the window brought in the crisp, tranquil scent of a Midwestern fall. "I always knew you had the grit to steer this operation, Claire," I replied. And honestly, it was the very first time my praise did not sound like a battlefield debriefing. I just needed to prevent anyone from torpedoing your success first. Just 6 months prior, I was standing in a dingy industrial park purchasing a guy's life markers. Yet here we were tonight, playfully bickering over the proper technique for cooking poultry. That wild shift in reality actually pulled a genuine, crinkle-eyed grin out of me. We stuck strictly to boring boardroom updates and my fake pensioner routines, steering entirely clear of my Black Ops past and those cartel specters. Studying her from my side of the dining room, I saw someone who had forged her own armor, no longer requiring a dark figure standing guard. She mirrored her mother completely, whip-smart, tough as nails, and fiercely autonomous. Meanwhile, the glowing flat screen across the room served as a window into the underworld I used to call home. Except now, I was nothing more than a civilian watching from the sidelines. Right as we cleared the last bites, the burner device in my jacket buzzed with a message, displaying an encrypted confirmation from my contact, Vance. "Word is, they finally nabbed her," I muttered, offering my daughter that last crucial fragment of our nightmare. "Sophia Vance has been detained in Seoul." We both pivoted toward the television, captivated by the cold glow of a global news bulletin. The very person groomed to steal my child's life was plastered on the channel, reduced to a pathetic prisoner sitting behind bulletproof panels halfway across the globe. "This is really the end of it, right?" Claire asked in a hushed tone. "All the monsters are locked away." I gave a slow nod, experiencing the profound relief of snapping the ultimate thread of that corrupt dynasty. Then she dropped the night's next massive surprise, confessing that she had been quietly taking Korean language classes. Her motive had nothing to do with cracking the enemy's code. She simply craved a connection to the foreign world that had consumed so much of my past. Glancing from the broadcaster back to my face, she hit me with an inquiry that completely knocked me off balance. "Tell me, Dad, how did the city actually feel back in your prime?" The narrative I shared with her that night completely skipped the espionage and surveillance bugs. Instead, it began with the pungent smell of wet asphalt in an open-air bazaar, painting a picture of who I was long before transforming into a lethal protector. 7 months drifted by since those criminals got slapped in irons, bringing a crisp Midwestern fall that felt like it scrubbed the entire metropolis pure. The graveyard carried a heavy silence, the exact brand of dead quiet that usually forced me to sit with my worst mistakes. Yet on this particular morning, the sound of boots crunching on icy pebbles felt remarkably like a ceasefire. Strolling shoulder to shoulder with my daughter toward that old stone marker beneath the towering oak, I thought about the empty patch of dirt I had purchased beside my late wife, my grim contingency for fading away. But the moment her fingers intertwined with mine, sharing a comforting warmth, it dawned on me that I was no longer rushing toward the grave, and I gently laid one pale flower atop the polished stone. That specific bloom used to taunt me in the church pews, yet out here in the biting dawn air, it stood as a symbol of absolute closure. I shielded her. "Elena," I murmured silently to the heavens, "just like I promised." The fatal burden she took to her grave was officially lifted, transforming the quiet space between Claire and myself from a barricade into a mutual sanctuary of healing. "Mom would be absolutely thrilled to see the guy you used to be," my daughter murmured with unwavering confidence. "But she would be even prouder of the man you are right now." For the record, it was the first drive of my life where my eyes never darted to the rearview mirror. Decades of ingrained paranoia, that constant, twitchy search for tales and phantoms, evaporated in the light of an honest morning. After leaving the memorial grounds, I pulled up to the local cathedral completely alone. The thick aroma of smoke and chilled marble welcomed me in, offering a strange solace to someone forged in the shadows. I met the aging priest in his back room, his gaze carrying that same tired wisdom, and slid a thick parcel across his desk. A massive financial payload drawn straight from the enemy's hidden vaults. It held the absolute last of the cartel's liquidated assets, essentially blood money that desperately required some kind of divine cleansing. Think of this as the ultimate balancing of their corrupt ledger, Padre, I stated, letting the heavy reality of the moment sink in. Put it toward that shelter project for people wrecked by economic ruin. A knowing look passed between us. The man understood the ugly deeds I had orchestrated for a righteous cause, pocketing the cash without a shred of condemnation. "Walk in the light, Alaric," he responded, his raspy voice offering absolute absolution. Every last debt wiped out. Pushing past those massive oak double doors, the crisp autumn sunlight hit my skin like a physical blow. That fortune was never truly meant for my pockets anyway. It belonged to a phantom, and my days of playing the invisible man were officially over. Just hours before, I stood watching the final hard copies of the Silver Shepherd dossiers burn, staring until the brittle, aged paper turned entirely to gray flakes. All that survived were the truths I finally laid out for my daughter, Claire. For the first time in 20 long years, my brain didn't automatically map out the nearest escape route or profile the pedestrians for potential assassins. Slipping a hand inside my jacket, my thumb brushed against something coarse, a faint residue of pulverized stone. It was the last lingering trace of my former existence. The handler, the shadow broker, the apex predator of the intelligence world, those versions of me, were dead. Right then, I was nothing more than an ordinary guy taking the church steps 2 at a time into the blinding glare of a windy Illinois day. Dragging the freezing air deep into my lungs, it hit me. My final objective was the very thing I had been avoiding for decades. I actually had to figure out how to be alive. My boots hit the pavement right under the blazing midday sky. Nobody was tailing me, and my hand didn't instantly reach for a concealed weapon. Over the past 30 years, I had never slept in a room where I couldn't slip out a window. But stepping through my own front door that evening, the space actually felt like a sanctuary instead of a bunker. The operation was wrapped up. Yet, the absolute lack of noise wasn't that terrifying vacuum that usually follows an extraction. It felt incredibly calm, like the walls were finally exhaling after holding their breath for decades. Heading back into my home office, the brass desk light threw these stretched out, mellow shapes across the floor, and for once, my mind didn't turn them into boogeymen. I bypassed the sweeping protocols, no hunting for listening devices, no checking the perimeter cameras. My only task was dismantling the leftover pieces of my espionage career, packing them away piece by piece without rushing. I tossed the offshore lockbox keys and a handful of harmless keepsakes into a pile. There was a battered timepiece, an analog navigator that had seen entirely too many jungles, and some blurry Polaroids of nameless faces. I tucked it all inside a compact mahogany box. That little wooden crate carried a staggering weight in my hands, holding an entire classified history finally ready to be unsealed. I was just latching the front clasp when my daughter walked in. Hearing her footsteps didn't trigger my defensive instincts anymore. She wasn't a liability to protect. She was simply my kid, dropping by. The air between us was incredibly heavy as I pushed the container across the desk toward her. "That is the absolute last of it, kiddo," I murmured. Zero black ink over the pages from here on out. Tracing the intricate patterns on the lid, she casually dropped a bombshell. She had already wired the offshore Black Ops money to a university, setting up an educational trust, honoring my late wife. All that blood money, my ultimate emergency stash, was now paying for college tuitions. Looking at her beaming face made every miserable, freezing assignment suddenly worth the blood, sweat, and tears. You want to know the absolute deadliest weapon on Earth? Forget firearms. Forget encrypted launch codes. The deadliest thing alive is honesty delivered after the damage is already done. By sheer luck, I had dodged that bullet. Sitting across from her in that cozy office, a massive revelation hit me. The boring, suburban dad persona I had fabricated wasn't just camouflage. Deep down, that was exactly who I desperately wanted to be all along. I just wanted to be a guy stressing over crabgrass and rain forecasts, rather than calculating body counts and getaway vehicles. "I am done with the secret agent, Dad," she whispered, her eyes completely genuine. "I just want my father." For once, the quiet wasn't something to be deciphered for hidden dangers. We just sat there, listening to the night wind rustling the curtains and the steady, grounding heartbeat of the grandfather clock. It dawned on me that the vulnerable child I had spent my entire existence trying to shield was now fierce enough to run the whole show. Darkness swallowed the skyline, leaving the downtown grid glowing like a sprawling galaxy right beneath us. And for the absolute first time, I wasn't plotting ways to slip through the unlit alleys. Leaning against the glass, I just took in the shimmering, low hum of the metropolis below. From my vantage point, I tracked her sedan as she pulled out, watching the red brake lights bleed away into the suburban sprawl. I knew with total certainty that the syndicates would never touch her, and she was finally out from under my toxic legacy. Staring out, my own face stared back at me in the reflection of the pain. Alaric Sterling sounded incredibly impressive. It was an ironclad alias that kept me breathing across multiple continents and countless brushfires. Yet, with this chapter definitively shut, my mind drifted to the identity printed on my actual birth records, a moniker I'd dropped long before the recruiters ever knocked on my door. I pictured Thomas, just a bookish kid who couldn't even tell a white lie without turning bright red. I had played the fiercely protective guardian for so long, I totally missed that my flock had grown fangs of their own. The watchman could finally clock out. Pivoting away from the cityscape, my hand found the dimmer switch. I killed the power, absolutely content to leave the darkness buried in the rearview mirror. With everything in the open, it is brutally clear that this wasn't merely some crusade against the underworld. It evolved into a gut-wrenching domestic reckoning, shoving my face into the reality of how badly I had failed as a parent. Decades were wasted believing that keeping my mouth shut was keeping her safe. My logic was completely flawed. I honestly figured burying my demons would create a magical barrier between my little girl and the monsters I hunted. But here is the agonizing takeaway from this entire nightmare. Holding back the truth quietly stacks bricks, brick by brick, until you are completely cut off from the ones you would take a bullet for. If I had a time machine to slap some sense into my younger self, my warning would be brutally simple. Do not shield your household by turning into a ghost. Spill your guts while you still can, before the emotional chasm gets too wide to jump. Outsiders might look at the wreckage and label it a classic case of a father's bloody vengeance. But deep down, payback was never the endgame. A parent's wrath might neutralize a threat, but it doesn't do a damn thing to fix the trauma born from years of lying. This whole terrifying ordeal hammered home one absolute truth. Real love isn't about pulling strings from the shadows or keeping people in the dark for their own good. Terror has a funny way of dragging decent family men down incredibly dark alleys. When the smoke finally cleared, the universe handed me a brutal wake-up call. Real protection is not about violence. It demands raw grit, total transparency, and letting go of your ego. Going rogue to settle a score might win you the immediate battle, but honesty is the only anchor that keeps a household from drowning. Looking back, I know heaven sent that hurricane to show me that genuine power never hides in the shadows. It thrives in open affection and radical trust. Thanks for riding out this absolute nightmare with me until the very last second. Your time and attention mean the world. Now, step into Alaric's reality for a minute. Standing at that terrifying crossroads, having to choose between spilling a devastating secret or completely destroying the bond with your daughter. What is your next move? Sound off in the comments section with your own strategy. If this descent into chaos resonated with you, hit subscribe so we can face the next storm together. Please note, a few details in this ordeal were heightened to give the narrative its maximum cinematic impact.